Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto x Kunou Highschool DxD Part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for Part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. The clear sky spread out over him, dotted with shapeless white clouds as a gentle breeze ruffled through the grass. Warmth beamed down as the teenager sighed and crossed his hands behind his head. I want to squeeze some hide, Issei muttered in a tone of weary longing. Motohama frowned at the words of the former sports star, readjusting his thick glasses with a sigh. Stop saying that. You're making me feel empty. The bespectacled teen admitted, his tone full of the teenage angst caused by lack of female contact. Sitting up in a quick motion, Issei squinted out over the track field as his dark brown eyes wordlessly followed a gaggle of jogging girls. Matsuda, Motohama, why did we even enroll in this school? It had seemed like such a good idea back when the private school first announced they were going co-ed. But now Issei was feeling pretty stupid. A forlorn look crossed Matsuda's face as he rose alongside his brunette friend and tuned out Motohama's by-rote recitation of their former expectations in joining Kunou Academy. Would it kill Motohama to stop goofing around? In short, we'll get a harem? Issei rolled his eyes and shoved his hands in his pockets as he stood. They weren't little kids anymore, so he couldn't keep pretending he'd become massively popular just because he got into high school. This might only be our first week here, but I really don't think that it's going to be any different than middle school. We'll just be the same losers. Matsuda sighed, covering his buzz-cut scalp like he could hide from the world. Stop trying to rain on the parade, Issei. You're going to make me depressed before I even get my first rejection. At least let me have my dreams until then. Girlish squeals cut over their conversation as a certain blonde student passed by, the air seeming to practically sparkle around him. Female students crowded around Kiba Yuto and pestered him with questions and invitations. Suppressing a frisson of annoyance, Yuto screwed on a twinkling smile and shut them down with a gentle "I'm sorry, but I have club activities right now. Thank you for inviting me, though. I'm really sorry." A trio of seething jealous gazes followed the blonde-haired, blue-eyed school idol as he strode off. Kiba Yuto. Class 1C and an idol to all the girls in the school, and an enemy of all boys, us included. Motohama growled lowly, making a dramatic fist. Kicking at a pebble, Issei hunched his shoulders tighter and scowled. Damn it! It's stupid how he's getting all the girls just because he's a little handsome, pretty smart, and good-natured. It's such an unfair world. Stop saying things like that, you're making me feel empty. Matsuda checked his watch before grinning suddenly and scooping up his school bag. It's almost time. Stay here and mope if you want, I've got places to be. Where are you going? Issei blinked in surprise, Motohama turning to study Matsuda with him. A significant lecherous smile was Matsuda's reply. Where do you think I'd be going in our lovely, once all-girls school? It's time to find some eye-candy fellas. They seriously hit me with their bamboo swords. Issei winced as he tried to rub away the stinging from the back of his head. Fixing his two so-called best friends with glares, the brunette gave it up for a lost cause and cradled his forehead in his palm. I wasn't even looking. I wouldn't complain if I had seen some at least. Unlucky for you, Issei. Motohama smirked as he polished his glasses on the hem of his shirt. You win some, you lose some, my friend. That's the way of the world. Fuck off. A faint creak drew Issei's attention, and he tuned out his sniggering friends as he craned his head up at the noise. Crimson streamers. Blue orbs. Haunting beauty stared down at him, and Issei could do little but gulp and press a hand over his suddenly racing heart. Sweat beaded on his palms. But just before the heat in his ears would have forced Issei to divert his attention to gain some semblance of self-control, the wondrous apparition vanished. A pale, delicate woman with the reddest hair he'd ever seen and deep blue eyes had leaned into his world for the shortest minute. She'd simply been enjoying the breeze as it stirred through blood-red strands, and he'd been instantly smitten. Without a word and barely a glance, she'd left him with shaking knees. Then she was gone, undoubtedly driven away by his wretchedness. What a cruel world. So there are people in the old schoolhouse after all. Matsuda's musing drew Issei from his mire of self-pity. I heard that the new owner was fixing it up, but I thought it was just bullshit. Breathing out longing and knowledge that some things were never meant to be, Issei fell back into old habits. That red hair is so nice. The brunette commented with an admiring tone. I wonder if it's all natural? Rias Gremory. Motohama grinned as he focused through his glasses. Rumor says her family comes from Northern Europe. But I'd stay away if I were you. Her nephew is in our class, and I think even you heard about that incident with the rugby team. Some things aren't worth dying for. All three boys shivered, as if Naruto would jump out of the bushes at them screeching madly and swinging a bloody axe. "You're just a little human encyclopedia, aren't you?" Issei laughed awkwardly, trying desperately not to think about how Naruto Gremory would break him in half like he'd supposedly done to the rugby team coach. "Except your only talents seem to be memorizing facts about girls you have no chance with." Issei was in the same class as the red-haired boy, and while the other boy had always been polite, there was still a bit of dangerous air to him. Naruto Gremory wasn't someone he wanted to mess with. Better to not even think about Rias Gremory ever again. Black and white tangled on a field of contrast, lorded over by a handful of gleaming sinister red chess pieces. "That boy just now," Rias murmured as she carefully studied the chessboard, cradling her chin with dainty fingers. "Sorry?" Akino queried quizzically, sprawled on the opposite couch as she thumbed through an issue of some American music industry magazine that Rias didn't care to study too closely. Muscle cars and screamo were a little too vulgar for her tastes. "I mean the one in the middle," Rias clarified, considering all possibilities stretching over the constructed chess scenario before her absently. "There was something off about it, don't you think?" Rolling her eyes to the ceiling in thought, Akino bit her lip before nodding decisively. "He's in Class 1B. If I recall correctly, his name is Haidu." "What about him?" Violet orbs traced over Ria's pensive form as the servant redirected her sole attention to the Gremory noblewoman. "Never mind," Rias decided as she leaned ahead and pushed her white pawn into position. "I was probably just seeing things." Drawing back, she stood with an air of grace and pronounced her victory. "Checkmate." "Oh my," Akino muttered as she leaned forward, tracing her gaze over the board. "I expected that to take you at least twice as long. Now I'm a bit depressed." "It was an easy problem," the stripping Rias asserted confidently as she carefully slipped out of her school uniform, throwing it in the hamper and stepping into the clubhouse bathroom for a quick shower. "And I don't believe you." "I did raise the difficulty quite a bit, though," Akino defended, moving her eyes from the abandoned chess board to the open bathroom doorway. "Did you? I hope the next one will be harder," Rias called out as she stepped under the steaming spray. Even as she lathered up her milky flesh, the redhead found her thoughts returning again and again to that Haidu boy. He was nothing special to look at, and from the little she'd seen he was likely as dumb as a post, but there was still something about him that spoke of barely contained power. "Perhaps Haidu possesses a sacred gear?" Rias theorized, turning to let the hot shower wash the suds from the back of her shoulders. "Or maybe some latent non-human ancestry?" Akino took a moment to respond, before shouting back in a distracted tone. "It would best a good idea to keep an eye on him, I suppose. And just so you know, Sasuke just walked in." "And you're just telling me this now?" Rias screeched, embarrassed heat flooding her face. "Close the door, you degenerate. And give me some warning next time." Naruto resisted the urge to slam his face into his desk, squinting over at the clock that hung above the blackboard. He'd been counting down the minutes all day, waiting for the moment the last bell rang so that he could get the hell out of this torture chamber. Half an hour to go. Tearing the corner off his notebook, Naruto balled the little piece of paper up. After cautiously glancing up at the teacher who was seated at her desk, the redhead cranked his arm back and threw the little missile as hard as he could. Sasuke twitched when the paper ball hit him in the back of the head, the Uchiha sending a toxic glare over his shoulder at the cheeky Gremory heir before deliberately turning back to his schoolwork. Grinning at the dismissal, Naruto just crafted half a dozen more projectiles, aiming for the back of Sasuke's neck every time. He wondered if the bell would ring first, or if Sasuke would finally break down in a roaring fit in the middle of class. It was probably a bit sadistic of him, but Naruto really wanted to see the second. Japanese high school might be more highbrow than his time in the ninja academy had been, but overall it was just as bland and dull. A little drama or a few pranks would spice things up before he died of boredom. And considering he was only at the end of his first week and still had months to go, Naruto knew he'd rather pull out his own eyeballs than sit through another few years of this. Fucking Sona and her fucking academic obsessions, twisting his arms and making him go through a full high school career with her. Naruto pouted when Sasuke absolutely refused to respond to his teasing, folding his arms and glaring at the clock with all the aggression of a pent-up teenager. 20 minutes to go, and he was just about ready to strip naked and reenact Lord of the Flies in a 10th grade classroom. "Hey, give this a shot," the boy seated between Naruto and the window whispered, and he briefly looked over. Hayate handed Naruto a thick white brand new eraser that was still in its little cardboard jacket, and the devil in disguise leered back ferally. "You're not so bad," he complimented, scanning over the crowd of students and looking for a decent target. "So what if it was childish?" More than one of the kids in the room were adult non-humans in disguise and probably just as bored out of their skulls as he was. Picking out the glossy dark mane of that one fallen angel girl who'd introduced herself to the class as Yuma Amano, Naruto cocked his arm back and let the eraser fly. It conked right into the back of her head, bouncing off and landing on the floor with a rubbery plop. The look that Rainier sent back promised unmentionable horrors. Smirking back cheekily, Naruto waggled his eyebrows. When she slowly turned back around without rising to the bait, Naruto slumped in disappointment. Was it too much to ask for at least someone to do something entertaining? There might be only 15 minutes left, but he was so bored. A faint trickle of heat bloomed in his groin, and Naruto hunched over with a frown. This was no time for a boner, and even if it was, there was no reason in particular for his stiffy. It wasn't like he'd started having pervy thought. Damn teenage hormones. This second puberty was killing him. Reaching down carefully in an attempt to tuck himself carefully under the waistband to hide, Naruto recoiled with a shout when his fingers encountered not hard flesh, but a searing holy flame. His crotch was literally on fire. Gremory-san! The teacher crowed like a harpy as Naruto jumped to his feet and began to frantically pat at the flames. Damn it, why wouldn't they just go out? There were certain things that were never supposed to come near a man's junk, and fire was pretty fucking high the list. By the time the redhead finally managed to smother out the yellow-tinged blaze, it had burned a hole right through the front of his slacks to reveal his toad-patterned boxers. He croaked awkwardly, covering the hole with both hands to hide it from the wide-eyed stares of his classmates. It wasn't me? Shinomura-sensei descended with all the fury of a middle-aged spinster, clucking with rage and flapping her hands. In all my years I've never seen such hooliganism. Playing with fire in my classroom? Get out. I will be having words with the administrator, young man. Then the gray-haired matron chased him out in the hall, slamming the door behind the bewildered Gremory heir with a slam. The very last thing he saw before the door was closed was the victorious leer on Reina's face. Oh, it was so on. Sasuke stepped into the newly formed Occult Research Club's private dorm with a heavy sense of relief. Finally, after enduring the hungry gazes of the female population of Koe Academy for a week, he'd get to have a few days of not being raped with their eyes. Where's the rest of them? He asked Kaneko, who was sprawled out on the couch mashing her thumbs against the buttons of her Game Boy. Who knows? The Nikomata mused, fully absorbed in leveling up her Magikarp. Naruto grew to level 12 was proudly displayed on her screen in blinking characters. Kaneko was in Class 1A with Valerie and Ravel, so she hadn't seen any other member of their scattered group since lunch break. Yudo said he would take in our applications to join the cooking club. Shucking off his black blazer and throwing it over the back of the empty couch, Sasuke couldn't help but grimace at the reminder of the blonde knight. As bad as he'd had it with all the airhead girls leering at him, at least they kept their distance. Yudo was so polite and friendly that he was getting ambushed every day. Truly, fangirls were the bane of man. You should probably save, Sasuke advised, rolling up his sleeves and switching gears as he crossed the Victorian-themed clubroom. There was a pair of crisp new folders perched on the corner of Rias' desk, and Sasuke knew without even opening it that they were full of contract seals. Unless you want to roam around town trying to work and play a retro Pokemon game at the same time. Kaneko huffed explosively, mashing a few buttons as she saved her progress before shoving the handheld console in her pocket. Let's get this over with, she muttered, rolling to her feet and stretching in a way that had the hem of her skirt rising dangerously high. Leaving the folder that Rias had elegantly scrawled Naruto's name across, Sasuke snatched up the other and folded it under his arm. Amber eyes glinted mischievously. The faster we do this, the faster we can do some grinding. I am not playing EverQuest again. Sasuke sighed with exasperation, pulling a sheaf of contract seals out and shoving them into Kaneko's hands. First of all, I have better things to do. Secondly, Warcraft is objectively superior. You're a filthy heathen with no appreciation for the classics. Sasuke let that one slide as they left the clubhouse, jogging across the academy grounds in a hurry before splitting at the front gates and heading in opposite directions. Honestly, he wasn't thrilled about spending the first half of his Friday evening playing errand boy. But someone had to do it, and Sasuke was rational enough to admit that finding places to tape up what basically amounted to Rias advertisements was probably the job of a servant. Zeoticus had been giving him odd looks lately, so maybe it was paranoia, but maybe Sasuke really was on thin ice. Either way, he had a role to play, and he fully intended to succeed. Grateful that at least it wasn't raining out, Sasuke kept up a light sprint over the asphalt as he moved into the working-class end of town. If there was anyone that would be willing to take a gamble on the supernatural, it would be the destitute and desperate. Out of 100 contract seals, maybe one would actually be used by some human down on his luck. And of the ones actually used, maybe a tenth of those would actually follow through on the contract after summoning. Unlike Hokkaido, there had never been a strong devil presence in Ko until the Gremry clan bought the academy. Cleria Belial had once formerly reigned in the town, but even then she'd never really done much to fortify her control. Building up their reputations through contracts would involve a lot of work for very little reward, but every revolution had to start somewhere. Sasuke just wished that start didn't have to be in a shit-covered bathroom in some run-down konbini. I'm home. Revel yawned, bracing herself against the wall as she kicked off her brown loafers. She could hear the quiet chatter of half a dozen voices and hoped she hadn't missed dinner by staying at the library for a few hours. It wasn't that the blonde couldn't afford to order some delivery food if she had, but no one wanted to pass up on Yuto's cooking. The blonde knight had become a veritable gourmet wizard over the past few years, meticulously experimenting with every dish until he truly mastered them. Padding over the dark hardwood floor in sock feet, Revel dropped her book bag outside the door to the kitchen. Oh good, you're still cooking, she noted as she entered the room, startling Valerie and prompting an easy wave from Yuto. Lasagna is it? 4 cheese with ricotta. The gray-eyed young man clarified with an easy smile, tapping his fingers on the counter as he watched the clock. It'll only be another minute or so. Everyone else is already seated at the table. Recognizing a polite suggestion when she heard it, Revel hummed and moved towards the dining room, giving her fellow bishop a tight nod as she passed. Valerie returned it easily enough, and a little knot of tension she hadn't noticed before loosened between her shoulder blades. In all likelihood she and the other blonde would never be friends, but as the months wore on the situation had become less antagonistic. They played politely enough in front of everyone else, and in private they simply ignored each other. It was quite a difference from the raging hostility that had once boiled in their veins whenever they were in the same room. Oh come on, it was just a bit of fun. Even so, you shouldn't be bullying other students in general. Doing it to an agent of the Grigori is just asking for trouble. Rias chastised her sullen nephew, shifting her gaze briefly as Revel entered the room. Nothing happened this time, but you still provoked her into spellcasting. That can only happen so often before you get caught by the humans, and then where would we be? Fine, Mom. Naruto huffed, turning away from his aunt and winking at Revel once Rias could no longer see his face. I'll behave. Not he mouthed to Revel, making her snort with amusement. Taking the empty seat next to her fiancé, Revel peered across the table at where Sasuke was murmuring to Kaneko and poring over a map of the city, crossing off neighborhoods with a black marker. Making good progress? Some. Sasuke grunted, not bothering to look up. A little irritated at being ignored, Revel let the conversation drop. It wasn't like Sasuke scattering contract seals for Rias had anything to do with her in the end anyway. Contract seals could only be bound to a single devil and then networked to their peerage, so Revel wouldn't be getting a summon until Naruto started handing his out. Speaking of which, did you ever get around to handing out any of your contract seals? The blonde prodded, turning to Naruto with a questioning gaze. Naruto just grimaced. Nah, I'm not like the stiff bastard over there. We've got 3 years here, so I figured there was no rush to get things all done right off. And besides, there are a few things Gramps and I have to straighten out with the Belial clan. I've got no time to be running errands for random people right now. Which was fair, Revel allowed, and was probably the reason Rias wasn't hounding Naruto to start fishing for contracts. It was important to settle things with the Belial clan, even if it came at the cost of digging their claws into Ko. After Cleria's death and the following scandal, the Belials had pulled back from Ko, but they'd always maintained at least a vague claim to the territory. The Gremry were by contrast newcomers, recklessly sticking their nose into the Japanese town. It was a clan dispute that wouldn't escalate to war, but there were a few formalities to observe and apologies to be made. Xiaticus had taken advantage of Lord Belial's relative poverty and weakness to get his foot in the door. Now they had to smooth down ruffled feathers before a real grudge formed. Wishing for once that her fiancé was further down in the line of succession and less caught up in Xiaticus' new power games, Revel took a pensive sip of water. I suppose Valerie and I could split them and spread them around for you. She volunteered reluctantly. Even if she'd rather not work with her rival, Revel could put aside that friction for the sake of increasing the grip Naruto's clan had on Ko. It would be better to spread their net as quickly as possible, before another clan, or worse, one of the Yukai factions, tried to cut in. Grinning sheepishly, Naruto awkwardly scratched the back of his head. Well, I won't say no, you'd be doing me a favor, but I figured I'd just try to bribe Rias into doing it. So don't feel like you have to jump up or anything. Revel cocked an eyebrow. Oh ho? Too good for a bit of honest work are you now, young master? I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. There are lots of people out there who get quite spoiled by a little bit of luxury. I don't want to hear that from you, little Miss Grilled Chicken. Smiling nastily, Ravel snaked her hand under the tablecloth and pinched the meaty part of Naruto's thigh with all the force her manicured nails could sustain. The redhead gave a low but satisfying hiss of pain. I meant Hellbird. The great and glorious Phoenix, who of course doesn't even compare to your magnificence. Ravel let the sarcasm slide, releasing her grip. But before she could pull back, Naruto startled her by grabbing her hand and threading their fingers together. The simple affectionate gesture made her cheeks warm, even though no one would think anything of it. Why would they? There'd been enough outright kisses to make handholding pretty damn tame. In the end, the bishop supposed she could just chalk it all up to the pleasure of having her affection vindicated. Naruto was still so conscious of boundaries, never doing anything too risque or pushing the boundaries too far, but at least he desired her now and admitted it. Which was what she'd originally wanted in the first place. I hope that no one has spoiled their appetite with sweet snacks, Yuto declared, sweeping in from the kitchen with a steaming hot dish of lasagna in his mid-clad hands. The blonde gave Kaneko a significant glare as she deliberately took another bite of her half-eaten biscuit. Because I expect you to clear your plate either way, so don't blame me if you eat so much you make yourself sick. It's like he thinks he's Gordon Ramsay, Naruto muttered under his breath. Gasper knuckled at the corner of his eye, trying to get rid of the dry, itchy feeling that came with going 2 days without any sleep. Once he was done editing Kaneko's latest Let's Play, he'd upload the video to YouTube and bundle up somewhere for a few hours. A sharp knock sounded at the door, followed by the creaking of steps as someone came down into the damper's basement lair, flicking on the lights and chasing away the darkness. Against his will, Gasper found himself squinting at the brightness. Hello? It's just me, Gasper, Yuto greeted, carrying a plate of still warm dinner over for the younger boy. The blonde had sprinkled a few drops of his own blood over the top as seasoning, not enough to sate a true bloodthirst but enough to please Gasper's vampirism. I brought you some lasagna. Mumbling out a quiet thanks, Gasper turned back to the screen and began rooting around under the desk. Eventually he found a half-empty bottle of Pocari Sweat. Maybe it had gone warm, but it would still wash down his dinner. Even if Yuto wanted to hover around clucking with disapproval at his nutrition choices. I'm almost done with Kaneko's vid. Did you want me to look over yours too? Gasper offered, cutting off a forkful of pasta and cheese and plopping it in his mouth. The rich taste of Yuto's cooking was so good the little bishop moaned internally. Inspecting the open video program on the screen, Yuto hummed in thought. Sure, if you don't mind, that is. His own cooking channel was only starting to get off the ground, and his videos were always better edited when Gasper looked over them for him. But the knight didn't want to take advantage of the damper. Gasper swallowed, taking a slurp of his sweet-flavored ion drink before shrugging one bony shoulder. I don't mind at all, he chirped brightly, cutting up the rest of his lasagna into little square pieces. I already finished all my homeschool assignments for the month, so I have some free time. Thanks. Wringing his hands a little guiltily, Yuto stared at the back of Gasper's head before an idea came to him. I was thinking of making something new tomorrow for dinner. Do you like those little meat rolls? Curious scarlet eyes swiveled back to stare at Yuto. Are you talking about mataidai? They're okay. Why? A few years ago he'd have been too shy to ask his friends what they were after so boldly, but Rias peerage had become his family after rescuing him from his early imprisonment. Gasper still didn't trust strangers, but he'd become attached to all of the young devils, even Ravel, despite her obvious dislike for Valerie. Yuto smiled brightly and waved off Gasper's befuddlement. No reason in particular. I was just thinking of branching out. Everyone must be getting tired of constantly eating English and Italian food, and studying French cuisine is such a cliché, don't you think? I guess? The conversation trailed off with Gasper turning his focus back to his plate, scarfing down the rest of his meal before it got cold and resisting the urge to lick the plate once it was gone. So what if only animals did things like that? Yuto was really selling himself short. His friend might not cook much in ethnic variety, but what he did cook was always amazing. Passing the empty plate back to Yuto, Gasper watched the other blonde climb the stairs. Yuto left the lights on when he left, but everyone always did that. Even Valerie. It was starting to annoy him. Sure, he might not want to go outside, but that didn't make him a depressed shut-in. Darkness was just easier on his eyes, that's all. Gasper hopped to his feet, padding across the luxurious basement apartment Rias had built for him before peering up the stairwell. Once he was sure that Yuto was actually gone rather than just hovering around like a mother hen, Gasper snorted and slapped the light switch to the off position. The bishop made it halfway back to his computer when a sudden spark of awareness bloomed in the back of his head, making Gasper stumble before he found his balance. Huh. He wondered. So that's what it feels like. Someone had activated one of the contract seals, conveying through blood and across the strings of magic a person and desire that Gasper was the best to handle. That was quick. Sasuke and Kaneko had only started spreading the contract seals a few hours ago. Someone must have been pretty desperate, or at least pretty weird to use one so quickly. Slapping his cheeks to wake himself up, Gasper crawled back into his chair and brought up one of his dummy email accounts. He typed out a short, careful letter to one Sugiyama Yoko, trying to make it as vague as possible but keeping a few details that a legitimate summoner would recognize. One could never be too careful with all the human governments spying on everything. Gasper clicked send, firing off the electronic text through the strings of the web. All he had to do now was wait. Any minute now the woman that had called on him would respond, and he had to be ready. Gasper was just going to rest his eyes for a quick minute. Before he knew it, the young devil was snoozing face first on the keyboard, a long string of drool dribbling from his snoring mouth. 10 minutes later his speakers beeped with the notification of new mail, but Gasper slept on. Reina leaned her head back, resting her crown against the rough bricks and mortar that had gone into building Ko Academy. Just leave me alone. The fallen angel sighed, idly wondering if she could bash her brains across those bricks just to escape the sheer mediocrity that was her life at the moment. Oh, come on. You know you love me. Violet orbs glimmered like a purple flame as Rainier turned and settled the most poisonous gaze she could muster on the Gremory brat. No. I really don't. She'd sooner cut out her own eyes than admit to any level of affection for him. The redhead's antics might be slightly more interesting than suffering through yet another year pretending to be a human, but if she was the one playing target for his absurd antics, Rainier would prefer Naruto went and died someplace else. And a painful death at that, but Rainier would take what she could get. As long as the stupid little idiot wasn't bothering her anymore, she'd be satisfied. Boredom was better than mockery at the hands of an idiot child. Naruto pouted, poking out his pink lips and shoving his hands in the pockets of his ebony slacks. When you say things like that, you hurt my feelings, you know? I thought we were closer than that, Amano-chan. The grin he put on after that would probably melt some innocent little virgin's heart. In Rainier's case, that smile just pissed her off. She'd lived for centuries, scheming and fighting and surviving, only to have to spend her days babysitting a bunch of fucking children while she watched over the Haida boy. If the mission hadn't come directly from Azazel, she would have refused. But since it did come from him, the only thing Rainier could do was grit her teeth and bear it. For Azazel's sake, if nothing else. So how long do you think we're gonna be out here? Don't ask me. Rainier shot back coldly, folding her arms across her chest and glaring at the wall. For some reason or another, Naruto Gremory had targeted her for his pathetic harassment. And while she wasn't one to break down in tears about juvenile bullying, her return fire had landed her in time out with the red-haired buffoon. Considering her mission was to keep her head down and watch both Hayate Issei and the generation of devils infesting Ko Academy, Rainier couldn't help but sweat. She wouldn't be expelled this time, but if Naruto kept needling her, she wouldn't be able to keep quiet. And if she struck back, it might eventually lead to expulsion. And if she was expelled, Rainier would have to go before Lord Azazel and report that she couldn't even handle a simple mission like watching a handful of fucking children. The very idea of admitting to that kind of failure made her want to slit her own throat. Every bone in her body revolted at the thought of letting some devil treat her like his personal stooge, but Rainier decided if that was the only choice left to her, maybe all she could do was swallow her pride down and bury the sickly sweet taste of her own resentment. If that was what Lord Azazel needed from her, the only thing Rainier could do was comply. He'd saved her from death and desolation, giving her a home and new purpose. A bit of discomfort was nothing compared to that. Stretching her lips into a teasing smirk, the dark-haired fallen angel turned and cocked an eyebrow at the little mongrel who'd gotten her in trouble. And if you keep bothering your classmates, you might find those rumors about you breaking the rugby team in half sticking around. That was you? Bitch. I was wondering where the fuck that shit was coming from. Hey now, I was just saying your classmates might. I never claimed responsibility for such a thing. Slowly combing his fingers through silky crimson strands, Sasuke let Rias rest her head in his lap without protest. I expected you to be working, he commented instead, staring idly at the tapestry that crowned the wall opposite the windows. It depicted a single green lion swallowing the sun, swelling with sacred and profane divinity. There was some kind of comparison to Sasuke's own existence there, with the souls of his kin swimming beneath the surface of his skin, and he found his focus skittering away. Rias shifted from her side to her back, peeking up at him through a tiny crack in her eyelids. They were alone in the clubroom, and for the first time in weeks Rias wasn't bustling around frantically trying to tie up loose ends or get ahead of the curve. There's little to be done. Sasuke hummed his agreement, shifting his hand to cover her eyes until he felt the flutter of Rias' eyelashes against his palm. It was a wordless request for her to simply rest, and perhaps catch up on a few hours of sleep if she could. A request Rias accepted, and why not? Her father was the owner of the school, and she was miles ahead of the curriculum. Even if she skipped her classes, Rias wouldn't be punished. Especially considering she was a model student rather than the up-and-coming delinquent Naruto seemed determined to become. Running herself into the ground when she didn't have to would only be to Rias' detriment. The wind blew in gently from the open window, ruffling Sasuke's hair as Rias settled into a light doze, folding her hands over her stomach and letting the stiff muscles in her neck relax. Oblivion bore her awareness away, drowning it in the dark, sweet ocean of unconsciousness. She was cute, Sasuke reflected wryly as the ruined princess face went slack and Rias fell into a cycle of silent breathing broken by quiet little snuffles. He'd never been one to appreciate the cuddly and defenseless, but he couldn't help the easy warmth that began to fill his chest at the sight of her. Rias and the rest of the little patchwork family had worked their way into his heart, and Sasuke wondered if this was the kind of sentimentality that bonds created. It made him feel weak, like anyone could come along with a sharp blade and cut out the vulnerable underbelly of him. But there was no denying that it also made him feel content. Burying his fingers back into the softness that was Rias' mane, Sasuke let a handful of hours slip by, remorselessly missing his afternoon classes in order to let her sleep on. It was only when he faintly heard the bell signaling the last period of the day that the Uchiha reluctantly shook Rias awake. It's time. Rias jerked, her sea-green eyes flying open and flickering over to the grandfather clock that lurked in the corner. I'll have to ask the Kunou for today's homework, she grumbled, shifting about on the couch so she was sitting upright beside her pawn, and convince her not to tell Naruto about it. You'd never hear the end of it. Sasuke agreed easily, lifting his arm so Rias could cuddle into his side with an amused huff. Perhaps I should spill the beans myself, just so I have company in my misery. She half-heartedly punched him in the ribs for that, but otherwise not doing anything to disturb that careful press of warm flesh on warm flesh that connected them. Troglodyte. You'd do that to your own king? If I have to suffer Naruto's whining about not helping him skip class, you should too, don't you think? Giving Sasuke a sad puppy look, Rias let her lower lip wobble and her eye fill with unshed tears. Rather than making Sasuke cave, however, it just made him laugh, which in turn made Rias break out in giggles. Oh fine, do whatever you want. I just hope when I decide to join my nephew in delinquency you take responsibility for it. I doubt you'd ever come close to Naruto's level. He's got years of practice, Sasuke pointed out blandly. As bad as Naruto was shaping up to be by the standards of the 21st century Japanese education system, what the redhead was doing had nothing on some of the hijinks he'd gotten up to during their academy days. Throwing a few water balloons was nowhere near the level of painting over the Hokage monument. Rias blinked, lowering her gaze as she reached out to trail a slow finger in circles on the top of Sasuke's knee. Was he really that bad back there? She asked delicately, euphemistically, because even if Konoha wasn't a formally contraband topic, everyone in their little family was reluctant to bring it up. Naruto and Sasuke had never seemed eager to speak of it themselves, especially after the fiasco last year, and generally Rias let sleeping dogs lie. She'd rather have her curiosity go unsated than ask Sasuke to reflect on painful memories just so she could get the full story. Rias knew the most important details of his life, along with a few tidbits about Sasuke's early childhood, and that was enough. But if Sasuke wanted to talk about it for his own reasons, she'd be glad enough to listen. Rias wanted to know everything about him. Silent stillness filled the air for a few tense heartbeats, and then the corner of Sasuke's mouth twitched upward in nostalgic amusement. Yeah, he was a little shit. I'm not pleased that he keeps throwing spitballs at me, but at least he's not ambushing me and tying me up in a closet somewhere, which he has done, by the way. It could be worse. But why? Rias blinked in befuddlement. Was that just typical for ninja students to do to each other, or was Naruto trying to go above and beyond just to bully you? The mere thought of Naruto trying to bully him made Sasuke throw back his head in a sharp bellow of mirth. No. He shook his head as he forced back his chuckles, cautiously wiping away a little tear of laughter that had caught in his eyelashes. Naruto wasn't a bully. He was the bullied, I guess. But that particular incident was because he wanted to transform into me and tried to interrogate the girl he had a crush on, and needed me out of the way. And how did that go for him? He drank some expired milk that morning and ended up shackled to the toilet, shitting his guts out before he could get anywhere. Rias snorted, easily able to picture her energetic and occasionally thoughtless nephew getting tripped up by his lack of attention to detail. That sounds like him. Pushing away the memory of the first time he'd broken Sakura's heart by rejecting her for looking down on a lonely orphan, Sasuke focused on the now and smiled instead. He was always swinging between totally incompetent and absurdly competent back then. One week he'd get away with painting a national monument in plain sight, and in the next he'd get caught up in his own traps and covered in rotten eggs. He was practically an idiot savant, I guess. Thinking about just how far Naruto had come, from being known as a lucky dunce in his first childhood to a born genius in the second, Rias realized that she still didn't really know him. She'd forgiven him for usurping her position as the heir to the clan, but that wasn't the same as actually bonding with him. What else was different then? She dared. Sasuke shifted his cold dark stare down to meet Rias' tentative teal, reflecting. He pushed back through the memories and heartache to a time when he and Naruto had still been lost children looking for something like home, and then the Uchiha began to speak. Words fell freely from his mouth as Sasuke explained the academy curriculum, how they trained until their fingers bled and calluses built up, and the pride they took in that. He described the classmates he could remember, from the lazy Shikamaru to the loud Ino and the quiet Hinata. He skipped only the complete isolation and subtle sabotage Naruto suffered, reasoning that it was his brother through time's tale to spin. Sasuke spoke and spoke, more in one sitting than he did in some days, until at the last the final bell of the day rang that signaled the end of classes. I should probably stop there. He cut off an anecdote about Irika's and Naruto's antics with a frown, glancing over at the clock. The disappointment in Ria's face was palpable, but she didn't protest, only giving his hand a reassuring squeeze before rising to her feet. If you head off to the kendo club you might beat Yuto there. She glossed over their talk effortlessly, letting sleeping dogs lie in a way that left Sasuke feeling thankful. Sometimes it was best to pick at the scabs of the past, to make sure that no poison had seeped in unnoticed. But it still hurt. And that fact that Rias knew when to push and when not to was proof she understood the heart of him. Alright, I'm heading out then, Sasuke murmured, standing with the lithe grace of a panther. If I see a Kunou I'll let her know that you're looking for her. Then without any hesitation Sasuke cupped her chin, tilted Ria's head back, and gave her a soft kiss. A soft squeak of surprise rose in the back of Ria's throat, but the shock passed and she responded eagerly. They were so cautious of the rumors that might start that Rias found herself half-starved and wanting at the best of times. She took everything she could get every time she could, kissing back so fiercely that Sasuke couldn't help but rise to the challenge. Sasuke settled one hand on Ria's upper back and the other on the curve of her hip, drawing her close and hating the thin cloth that prevented him from being able to feel the smoothness of her skin. His heart picked up speed, racing with electric desire as he kissed her deeper. Prodding at the seam of her lips until Rias yielded and opened her mouth, Sasuke aggressively tangled their tongues together in the way that always made her meal. I think I should be surprised, but I'm just not. Come on, Sasuke, what happened to bros before hoes? And just like that the moment was broken, Rias stumbling away with a burning pink face. Sasuke decided then and there that he didn't need to worry about any more spitballs in class, because by the end of the week he'll have killed Naruto. Issei winced as his mom's voice rose to a tinny shriek, distorted by the speaker of his cheap cell phone. Okay. I'll join something, he mumbled, tiredly rubbing at his forehead as his mother continued to rag on him. Yes, I'll do it by the end of the day. Yeah, okay. Bye, Ka-san. Flipping the slightly battered Panasonic mobile shut to end the call, Issei had the brief fantasy of snapping the little thing in half. He didn't have money to throw away getting a brand new model because he gave into his temper tantrum, but at least he'd be working some of his frustration out. Eventually the teen just exhaled gustily, shoving his phone in his pocket so he could rest his elbows on the green-painted walkway railing. I'm not gonna turn into a hikikomori, he complained moodily, staring across the lush academy lawn at a couple of cute girls. When the sight of pretty young women in school uniforms didn't make him feel any better, Issei knew he was in trouble. Kicking at the pavement with the toe of his shoe, Issei turned away from the girls and began to slowly amble his way back into the academy. Matsuda and Motohama were probably off somewhere trading the latest DVD of some eki anime, but he couldn't bring himself to care they were leaving him out. Damn it, why was this happening to him? Issei wasn't some muscle-headed jock, so why was his mom riding his ass so much to join one of the sports teams? It was probably some stupid fad she'd heard about from one of her housewife buddies, Issei reflected bitterly. In fact, it was probably that dumb old broad Sasaki-san filling his mom's head with nonsense about how sports would save her son from a lifetime of virginity. Honestly, just because he liked anime and was a bit socially awkward didn't mean that Issei was doomed to become a NET or a parasite single, or something. He might not be the sharpest knife in the drawer, but he wasn't that much of a failure. And if he was, Issei really doubted joining the baseball team would make a real man out of him. Muttering a quiet "excuse me," as he slid around a short white-haired girl with amber eyes, Issei climbed the stairwell to the second floor. If he had to join one of the sports clubs, he'd probably be better off talking to his homeroom teacher to find out which ones were open to first years. It was such a damn pain, but it was better to get it out of the way sooner. Just pick one that sounded half decent, and he could stick with it for the rest of his high school life. And if he got it done early, maybe Issei would have some time on the way home to stop in a few of the shops and see if there were any new manga series on the shelf that would catch his eye. Energized by the thought of finding a brand new and engaging harem manga to follow, Issei gave a small smile and put a little spring in his step. Maybe it won't be so bad, he hoped. After all, the girls did like a guy who could get a little rough on the playing field rather than a nerd. If he and the team won a championship somewhere, he might even be able to get his first girlfriend. Issei grinned at the thought, turning the last corner and quickening his pace until he stood outside his homeroom. If life gives you lemons, make lemonade, I guess? Then he turned the doorknob and stepped inside, only to stop dead at the reeking smell of wet chemicals. Covering his nose with his sleeve, Issei looked from one wet bright orange wall to the other. What the actual fuck? By the time Wednesday rolled around, Gasper was just about ready to call it quits. Now? He asked in a tired voice, red eyes glazed as he watched Kunou listen to his auto-tuned remix. The young woman just held up one hand to quiet him, closing her eyes and listening with one foot drumming out the beat. It's better, Kunou answered, sounding rather frustrated herself. But it's still not quite there. I don't know, the bass is too loud? You need to make the vocals a little clearer. Right now they're just being drowned out. Accepting the earbuds back with a little frown, the bishop threw them back on his desk before turning back to the computer screen and scanning over the interface of his vocal processing program. I'll try. As the days passed and he struggled to create an interesting and unique track, Gasper started wishing he'd never accepted Sugiyama's stupid contract. But hers was still the only contract anyone in their peerage had gotten so far. It'll be another half hour or so before I'm done with the tweaking, so I'll send you a text when I'm done. Thanks again for the help. Gasper sighed, grabbing the mouse and trying to get back in the groove. It wasn't that he wanted Kunou gone, but she didn't have to waste her time hanging out with someone like him. She probably had a few glamorous girlfriends from school to chat with instead. Kunou gave a careless shrug, throwing herself into the nearest brown leather couch before lazily resting her right heel on her left knee. If it's all the same to you, I'll just stick around. I don't really have anything better to do. So what's up? Keeping his focus on the computer screen so that she wouldn't see the pleased blush on his cheeks, Gasper tapped a happy little staccato on his desk before coughing awkwardly into his fist. Not a whole lot. Just trying to juggle working on the contract with learning JavaScript. What about you? Mostly brown-nosing. Kunou replied in a disgusted tone, reaching back and untying her bright yellow ribbon so her hair could hang down loosely. Rias and Sona want everyone at school to have a good opinion of us, so we've been pretending to be nice little first years like our lives depend on it. Share homework notes, stick around and volunteer to clean up, listen to the gossip, that kind of thing. Hesitantly, Gasper threw a pained smile over his shoulder at her. That sounds fun. The delicate sarcasm almost flew over Akinou's head, but she just barely caught it, blinking in amusement. Sure. It's oodles and oodles of fun. In fact, I've never been happier in my life. For years I've longed to be able to kiss human ass, knowing that for a few years I might be able to be popular with teenage girls. Gasper began to choke with hilarity, coughing as he accidentally swallowed a thick ball of spit. Oh. Let me guess, now that you're going to a human school you finally have a chance to reach all your dreams. Exactly. Kunou exclaimed, pressing a hand over her heart. Oh Gasper, there's no one in this world that understands me the way you do. Let us run into the sunset together, holding hands and knowing that at the end of the road lies 2.5 children and a yard with a white picket fence. Don't forget the dog named Spot. Oh, I could never forget Spot. I'm just appalled you forgot Lassie. Pounding the desk with a fist as his face turned cherry red from lack of air, Gasper couldn't stop laughing until darkness started pushing in from the corners of his vision and he felt like he was going to pass out. Lassie! Enough. He wheezed, clicking the computer mouse in an effort to try to get back on task. Kunou grinned wolfishly but let the damper return to work without any more fuss. It was easy to play a few rounds of Tetris on her mobile while Gasper worked away, but after a quarter of an hour the violet-eyed young woman found a question needling her relentlessly. Hey, if you're putting so much effort into making this remix, why don't you just cut out the middleman? If it's any good, you could make 10 times more selling it out as yourself, not to mention the fame you'd get. That's what I thought. Gasper moaned, roughly combing his bangs out of his eyes as he squinted at a particularly complex part of the track. But Rias said it's better to own an idol than it is to be one. If Sugiyama ever makes it big, we can use her fame to push whatever agenda we want. But if I was the one that made it big, I'd have to fake a death after a few years once people saw I wasn't aging. Shaking her head, Akino gave it up. The idea of some human taking credit for Gasper's work was a bit frustrating, but she could see her king's point. Not to mention there's the whole problem with having everyone think your natural face belongs to some dead internet celebrity. Exactly. It's just 100 times simpler to puppet some desperate human looking for a devil to make them famous. The clan doesn't need the money, and we get someone that will dance on the strings for 30 or 40 years if we want to push some social agenda or market some product. Which was a positively subversive and devious idea. A normal human would probably be indignant at the idea that their entire society was little more than a collection of competing consumer products markets by different supernatural factions. As a whole, it just tickled Akino's sadistic instinct and made her want to chuckle. But when she went to offer further snide commentary, Akino was interrupted by an almighty crash that echoed down from the floor above, raising hair on the back of her neck and setting her teeth on edge. "Hello? Anyone down there?" A very familiar and unwelcome voice bellowed down the stairs, accompanied by the pounding of feet and a certain eager muttering that made Akino want to carve her own eyes out with rusty spoons. No, 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 no! Gasper's last desperate prayers went unheard, since Naruto burst into the basement apartment with a wide grin on his face and a greasy bag of McDonald's in one hand. "What's going on down here, kids? Surfing the web for German scat porn and cheap dildos?" Covering his eyes, Gasper hunched down and wailed like a babe in arms. "Don't let him get close to me." "No!" Akino screeched like a wild animal, slapping at her plush leather cushions and pointing one spindly finger at the intruding redhead. The half-breed's clear polished nail practically vibrated with repressed violence. "Get the fuck back to your clan work. I know you haven't even gotten close to settling all the shit with the Belial clan." But come on, Akino-chan. I'm bored of that stuffy bullshit. It's too much for me to handle without a relaxing few days off. Have you ever tried not being a faggot? I heard it helps greatly with maximizing productivity." "Fuck you, slut. Are you joking with me right now?" Not at all. He actually fell through the window. Luckily he landed on a bush, so people aren't asking why he didn't break all his bones falling from the second floor. Sona sighed, pulling off her glasses and throwing them on the desk. 2 weeks into her appointment as student council secretary, and she was already questioning her sanity. Though to be fair to the pupils of Ko Academy, she had one persistent problem to deal with rather than an unruly student body in general. If not for him, she'd have no regrets at all. Steeling herself, Sona shook her head before shoving her glasses back on her face and bracing her elbows on her desk. It created an image of authority that would intimidate any normal student, but they weren't exactly dealing with a normal classmate. "Let him in." Ignoring the vaguely worried look Saji gave her, Sona squared her shoulders and settled an impassive indigo stare on Naruto Gremory. "I suppose we expected a bit of settling in to occur," she admitted before the redhead could even begin to speak, a slow furrow forming between her eyebrows as she studied him. "But don't you think this is a bit much?" Rias grinned crookedly, looming over Sona's shoulder like a vengeful angel. "I told you that you'd regret not giving him something to do," she reminded Sona with a mixture of malicious glee and fond exasperation in her voice. "You had a fair warning. So don't blame me if you aren't quite up to the task of managing him." "Hey, come on. Don't talk about me like I'm not here. You might hurt my feelings if you do that," Naruto teased, slouching down in the surprisingly comfortable armchair that was placed opposite to the dark-haired girl. "Nice digs," he complimented, shifting his rear about on the cushion in search of that one perfect position. Eventually finding a position that satisfied him, Naruto threw his feet up on the desk and clapped gleefully, like a child at the circus. "So what's going on, Gonna ask me to keep a better eye on our good friend Rainier and make sure she's minding her own business? Or did you just want to ask me how I managed to paint the entire classroom orange over the lunch break?" "Do not." Sona practically snarled, the violence in her voice so unusual that it startled both of the redheads who'd crowded into her office. "I pride myself of being fair and letting all students pursue their interests without judgment, but your interests seem to simply be pranking fellow students and making trouble for the staff." Lifting his hands in surrender, Naruto set his feet back on the floor. "Whoa now, cool your jets. It's just a bit of fun. This place is boring as fuck for me and I'm not hurting anyone. If anything, it keeps life interesting for them. Regardless, The Citri heiress opened the top drawer of her desk, pulling out a single sheet of paper that she looked over before nodding in satisfaction. Rias has proposed a good solution for the problem of your energy. This is your copy, mine is already submitted on file. Then Sona shoved the page in Naruto's face, crisply flapping it until he cursed and snatched it from her. Blue eyes glanced down and bugged out. Are you fucking serious? What the hell? I'm not joining the soccer team. Deliberately lifting a single condescending eyebrow, Sona smirked. And why not? Soccer is for sissies. Well, you should have thought of that before going on a pranking rampage across the school. It's already been submitted, so no backing out. Dismissing the red-haired troublemaker with a last scornful glance, Sona turned her attention back to this week's club expense report. In fact, you have your first practice in 20 minutes. I'd hurry on over if you don't want to be sitting on the bench for the rest of the season. Now, good day. Oh, fuck me. I would rather not. Rias began to laugh as Naruto cursed a final time and scrambled out the door. Hey, throw me a bottle. Swallowing down a hefty mouthful of water, Issei coughed in a pointless attempt to chase away the pain in his throat. Once it faded, he glared at Naruto out of the corner of his eye, grabbing a bottle out of the cooler and passing it to the redhead. Naruto grinned toothily, wiping away the sweat coating his forehead with the back of his hand. Everything okay at home? The question was a bit awkward, with Naruto looking away deliberately and taking a noisy sip of water. It wasn't like he was friends with Issei, it was just that he'd come to realize the well-meaning perv was the only person on the team that wanted to be around even less than Naruto did. They were bonding over their shared misery. Mom's happy, so it's fine. Issei sighed, pinching the front of his shirt and jerking it so it created a bit of a breeze to cool down his sweaty chest. The drills they were running were just killing him. Issei was going to die of heat stroke by the end of the hour, he just knew it. What about you? Same old, same old. Naruto shrugged, chugging down the rest of his water like he was dying of thirst in the desert. Rias hasn't been on my back for a few weeks, so it's all good. Oh, and we were thinking about putting in a steamed shower. Ever tried one out? Blinking at the sudden change in topic, Issei tried not to get whiplash and keep the instinctive jealousy off his face. Issei's family wasn't poor by any stretch, but they weren't rich either. It was hard not to envy the Gremory family's casual wealth. Yeah, a few times, but that was years and years ago at some public bathhouse. Damn. I never got a chance to use one myself. Long soaks in the bath were always more my thing. And Sasuke keeps looking at me like I'm a stupid fuck every time I ask him to describe it. I swear that I'm going to flush the toilet every time he gets in the shower for a week straight if he doesn't get his head out of his ass. It's kind of like a sauna, but not really. Issei offered unhelpfully, watching the other players work through a few team exercises. Then exactly what Naruto had implied sunk into his brain, and he choked on his water. Wait. He pounded his chest, wheezing wetly as he peered at the redhead with watery eyes. Are you saying you live with him? Yep. And you also live with your aunt? Well, it's not like we're short on space on anything. Naruto snorted. Everyone's got their own room. It's not like Yuto and Sasuke and me are all packed in some closet, like hot dogs in a package or something. Very carefully scrubbing his brain with mental bleach to clear away the images Naruto's words conjured, Issei screwed the cap back on his empty bottle and threw it in the trash can. That sounds interesting. He commented neutrally, suspecting that if people knew about some of the most attractive people in the school all rooming together, that by the end of day rumors of orgies would be spreading. Which would be kind of funny, but Issei wasn't that much of an asshole that he'd go around tattling on them. If Naruto's odd living arrangements got out, it wouldn't be because he spilled the beans. Hayate. Gremory. Get off your butts and get back in the game over here. Rolling his eyes at the couch, Naruto grumbled under his breath and lurched back to his feet. Coming? Yeah. Rainier pinched the bridge of her nose, fighting back her pounding headache as she scanned over the tabulated results of the latest in a series of observation spells she was quietly casting on Hayate. It wasn't easy to stalk him around town without being noticed. Rainier was far more used to simply letting the humans see her and weep at her perfection, but Lord Azazel had been very clear about her orders, and what he wanted from her was what he got. Firstly, that she adhere to the general policy of not overtly meddling in human affairs. So seducing the stupid little pervert to get close enough to gather data was out of the question. Secondly, that she conceal what exactly she was discovering from the Gremory clan and any other faction in the area. The business of the Grigori belonged to them alone. Not to mention that letting rival factions know what they were doing was in general strategically unwise. Thirdly, do whatever was needed to keep peace with Gehenna. Even if it meant playing nice with a bunch of ignorant little brats, and the half-breed in particular. Easy peasy, at least in theory. In practice it was a trial in patience. Flipping to the next page, Rainier found her attention caught by a particularly unique pattern in the graph of Hayado's aura. To most the numbers and bars wouldn't mean anything at all, but Rainier was familiar enough with the study of sacred gears to clue in. Hayado was practically seething with draconic energy. Twice critical then? There's a bit too much power density for that, but I suppose it could just be one of those rare evolved ones. She noted clinically, jotting her observations in the margins of the report. Lord Azazel would probably never need her insight, but she hoped that he'd decide she had more than air between her ears. Rainier knew that he deserved better than the simpering morons that surrounded him. Someone who was truly dedicated to helping him achieve his goals by any means necessary. Someone Rainier knew could be her, if she was just given a chance. After all, who would want to spend their time making contracts with a bunch of shitty mortals or spying on mouth-breathing vampires when they could be the assistant of Lord Azazel himself? To be able to work with a man and actually experience firsthand his charisma and genius would be one of the greatest blessings anyone in the Grigori could achieve. Smirking slightly, Rainier took a peek at the last page of her weekly report before vanishing it with a sparkle of angelic teleportation magic. Another week down, and who even knew how many to go? Rainier just hoped they went by quickly, for the sake of her sanity if nothing else. Otherwise she'd given to the urge to start murdering the humans en masse, and bloodstains were such a bitch to get out. On the last evening in April, Valerie found herself trying out a new brand of shampoo. She wasn't quite sure if Naruto preferred the smell of lavender, but at least she wouldn't be using the same vanilla body wash Rias did. Variety was the spice of life and all that. Then the raging mental pull of a contract seal being activated hit her like a bullet train, startling the blonde so badly she slipped in the shower and ended up smashing the back of her head against the glass walls of the stall. Clutching at the crown of her skull, Valerie cursed every deity she could name from Odin to Amaterasu. So what if it was unladylike? There wasn't anyone lurking around in the bathroom to judge her. Though Naruto wouldn't be unwelcome, she mused before clenching her jaw and massaging away the pain. Why is it me? Valerie wondered sourly, briskly scrubbing her pale skin down so violently some of it turned a splotchy red. Let Ravel spend her time running around bowing and begging the humans. It might even give Valerie a bit of time with Naruto without the threat of the other bishop sticking her nose in and interrupting every time she tried to kiss him. Satisfied she was clean and in no mood to relax beneath the warm spray of water, Valerie jerked the tap off with a shriek of metal on metal. Her pebbled at the sudden loss of heat, but the damper didn't let that bother her, quickly drying off and practically stomping back to her room. Half of her wanted to just kill whatever human it was that decided to summon her. It wasn't even fair. Her love had just finished hammering out the last details with the Belial clan and passed out contract seal a few days ago, and Valerie was already being summoned for a contract. In principle she didn't mind the work, but Valerie just knew that little grilled chicken slut would pounce on the opportunity to snuggle up to their king while she was gone. Valerie might have to put up with Ravel and any other wives Naruto collected so that her love could make political alliances, but she'd rather cut her own eyes out than let any of them get the drop on her. Naruto Gremory had never been with a woman, even if Uzumaki Naruto had, and Valerie intended to be the first. Not only would it make giving up her own virginity to him feel more special, but Valerie would make sure that Naruto knew no one could ever love him as much as she did. Forcing the annoyance off her face, Valerie tried to smooth her expression into something welcoming, and she dressed in an orange hoodie and blue jeans at whirlwind speed. There was nothing for it now, she had to represent her king in a bargain and win him a client. Which meant she couldn't come across as too irritated. When she was satisfied she looked half decent, Valerie typed out a quick text to Naruto telling him she was being summoned for a contract. Then without waiting for a reply she turned on the spot, tearing through the fabric of reality so roughly the lines of her blood-red teleportation seal were jagged. Colors and sounds shifted, melding and twisting until Valerie found herself standing with her arms crossed in what looked like a bare concrete basement. Ah, hello Devil-sama. Valerie looked down at the balding middle-aged man kneeling at her feet, cocking a smooth blonde eyebrow at the expression of mixed fear and awe that he wore on his bearded face. The contract seal fed the information directly into her brain, and she knew she was dealing with Kurigane Sunio, a 45-year-old man with undetected prostate cancer. Hello mortal. She greeted cool as a cucumber even though she was inwardly panicking and wondering what exactly she should say. If she fucked this up Ravel would just give that smug little smirk of hers. I'm here to listen to the request you have for the House of Gremory. Now speak. Perfect. Just the right mixture of formality and intimidation. If she wasn't being watched at that very moment Valerie would be jumping for joy. Ha! That would show that little grilled chicken, Valerie, was nowhere near an uncouth commoner. Mopping at his shining forehead with the dark sleeve of his business suit, the brunette man practically wheezed with nervous desire. Well, I was hoping that I could get a cure for my wife. She has liver failure, you see, and the doctors say we can't do anything but wait for the end. I was ready to give up, but then I saw your contract in one of the old books at my office, and he was desperate, turning to fantasy and the occult when the realm of human science had failed him so completely. He was just the kind of man that a devil could make a contract with, knowing that there was no choice except to make a Faustian bargain. For the first time since she'd banged her head against the side of the shower, Valerie found her lips stretching into a grin. And so you want to make a deal? That's fair enough, we can cure your wife's illness for you. The question is what you're willing to give us in return. Valerie was fudging the details a little bit. Technically speaking, it was possible for her to cure his wife's sickness with Sephiroth Graal, but she'd never actually consciously used her sacred gear before. If the human was willing to offer something that Naruto accepted, she was certainly willing to try, but until then her healing ability remained in the realm of the theoretical. Anything you want. You can have my soul even. Just as long as you heal my Aiko. Bargaining for souls is illegal now, Valerie noted, her scarlet gaze burning like an infernal flame in the dark shadows of the basement. But I'm sure that my lord can work something out. Once she got over her initial annoyance, Valerie was actually a bit satisfied at her contract. Unlike Ravel, she was proving herself to be truly useful and bringing her king an offer that would let him demand whatever he wanted from Sunio. Ravel might get a little bit of time to try to put the moves on Naruto, but Valerie was confident the younger girl wouldn't get anywhere in the time she was gone. Then Valerie teleported into Naruto's bedroom, proud as a peacock and ready to bring her contract to him for approval, only to find her blood boiling at the sight before her. Ravel was perched in Naruto's lap, one of his hands gripping the inside of her left thigh while his other hand held them upright. Both of Ravel's hands were cupping Naruto's face, lifting his chin so she could kiss him more deeply. It didn't take Valerie more than a second to guess that Ravel had her tongue in their king's mouth, aggressively demanding the affection that Naruto always seemed hesitant to give. Valerie hated that hesitance when she was kissing him, but she was glad for it now, because if Naruto had no shame then he'd probably be fucking Ravel on the floor this very second. Slut. Hello? Valerie greeted chirpily, grinning maliciously as Ravel gave a quiet shriek of embarrassment before tumbling out of Naruto's lap. Their king didn't do much better, his face flushing a deep cherry red as he stuttered and buttoned his shirt back up. Roughly clearing his throat, Naruto fumbled with the last pair of buttons at the bottom of his shirt before giving it up as a lost cause. Everything okay? He questioned, not daring to bring up the borderline sexual situation that Valerie had interrupted. Maybe Naruto was too shy to do it, or maybe he was just too sensitive to do so. In either case, Valerie was glad, because then she didn't have to discuss her feelings on the matter with him. She couldn't lie for shit to Naruto. I was summoned for a contract, Valerie offered up, threading her fingers together so she could project the image of a detached secretary. One of the humans wants us to cure his wife's liver failure, and he says he's willing to give us anything to do it. I thought the best thing to do was to bring the deal back to you so you could agree to it or not. Naruto's face contorted strangely, like he wasn't sure whether to be happy or if he wanted to be angry. It made him look odd, his eyes drawn into tense slits while Valerie waited patiently for him to agree to Sunio's bargain or not. I want to say go for it, he admitted slowly, clenching a fist anxiously. But I don't want you to use that. The existence of Sephiroth Graal hung over all of them like the sword of Damocles, eating away at Valerie's mind and barely kept at bay by constant doses of blood from the more powerful members of their household. The sacred gear was a fearsome, maddening existence, and Valerie quailed inwardly at the thought of actually willingly seeking it out. But she was afraid of uselessness more. Valerie wasn't under any illusions. She knew the chance of her becoming some heavy hitter without even touching her sacred gear was next to none, while Ravel and Naruto himself had access to famous genetic powers. Without Sephiroth Graal, she wouldn't even begin to close the gap and prove to everyone that Naruto had a reason for keeping her, physical attraction notwithstanding. I can do it. Valerie's quiet declaration cracked through the air like a thunderbolt, and steeling herself the damper let her cold ruby gaze drift between Naruto and Ravel. I can do it. And come hell or high water she would. She wouldn't be useless any longer. Sephiroth Graal is too powerful not to use, and if I'm going to learn to control it I need to practice. I agree. Ravel's declaration of support shocked both Naruto and Valerie, but the younger blonde just pushed on, jetting her chin out in defiance. It's counterproductive to coddle Valerie forever given what we want to achieve in the long term. Further, it's two-faced. How can anyone expect her to sit around doing nothing while they themselves gamble their lives for more effective spells? It was an argument that cut Naruto right to the core, slicing through all his objections like a silver bullet. The girls might not know every single little detail about his former life, but they knew enough about it, and enough about him to be able to say that he was a reckless moron himself. Naruto couldn't warn them off without being a massive hypocrite. Gritting his teeth, Naruto gave a jerky nod. Fine. We'll fill the contract. Just be careful. His azure orbs flickered like the hottest part of a flame, not embarrassed in the least by giving a half-naked lecture on a weekend evening. Just remember there's no rush, alright? You fix up his wife without working yourself to the bone. Not even Naruto could stop time. At least, not yet. The world would roll on, and she needed to roll with it, or be left behind. Valerie grinned, fully aware there were a few too many teeth in her smile, and the slits of her eyes were a little too sharp. Don't worry about it. I'll be careful, and if I feel like things are rushing over my head, I'll come find you. The sensation of a contract seal flaring into existence wasn't all that different from the bloody burn of the Manjikyu Sharingan. Pressure built in the back of Sasuke's eye sockets, thrumming slow and heavy as it raced across his nerves and finally spread throughout his entire body. It was a feeling of dominance, of supplication, and of aggression. If Sasuke had to describe the taste of it, he'd half-heartedly point to copper and iron. The metallic taste would be disgusting for those children reared in peace and plenty. For Sasuke, born and bred for war, that taste was a summons to the field to fulfill his original purpose of existence. Tearing through the weaves of the mortal plane, Sasuke stepped out into a cramped bedroom. A stained futon was curled into the corner, and a shabby television was perched on the opposite wall with a little beaten table beneath it. He'd been summoned by someone from the lowest of social classes, so poor that Sasuke could see the wrappers of a dozen desperate instant dinners filling the trash bag that had been thrown into the third corner of the apartment. Everything was filthy and destitute, from the rusty half-kitchen to the barely private bathroom. Aoki Yoshino, Sasuke murmured, drawing deeply from the instinctive information the contract seal fed him. What do you want? A gaze as dark and sharp as shards of ebony settled on a mutinous 14-year-old, her lip pursing out rebelliously. Yoshino was the stereotypical image of a cocky child that refused to accept any rules, raging up and down the streets of her hometown until she finally settled into becoming a boring middle-class mother with a few amusing stories. But the image didn't quite match the reality, and the more Sasuke studied Yoshino's averted stare and faintly shaking limbs, the more he realized that his contractor wasn't as bland as he'd assumed. Make your request and make your offer. Sasuke prodded, his voice softer but still unyielding. Otherwise there can be no contract. Yoshino's hand spasmed, the jerky motion riding up to her shoulders in a faint quiver that set her green-streaked ponytail bobbing. Between the dye job and the silver hoop piercing through her left eyebrow, the teen girl didn't seem like someone that should be so nervous before a devil that only looked like a 16-year-old boy. I want you to kill someone for me. She threw it down like a gauntlet, vindictive fire coloring her tone. It was like the girl was just daring Sasuke to judge her, to reject her request as too complicated or too immoral. Well, Sasuke reflected, the venomous red of the Sharingan whirling into existence. This might be a little interesting after all. Bargaining for souls or stealing them was outlawed by the treaty with heaven, but killing humans was technically not. Ignoring Yoshino's gasp of shock, the Uchiha studied her through the relentless clarity of his eyes. Everything was thrown into sharp relief, from the bead of sweat glistening at the human's temple to the frantic nervous pulse fluttering in the hollow of her throat. Go on. I'll do it. Valerie popped in behind Kurigane while the man was cooking his dinner, pulling a startled scream from the mortal and a failing jerk that spilled half-boiled rice all across the kitchen. The boiling water barely missed her, splattered on the floor in a steaming puddle. Picking a few white grains off her frilly green sundress as Sunio gaped at her, Valerie dropped them back in the pot before giving the man a look. I can wait in the entryway if you need some time to clean up. Then without waiting for him to stop sputtering, she turned on her heel and stalked from the kitchen. It was only once she left the room that Valerie heard the man finally start moving, muttering nervously beneath his breath as he hastily swept up his ruined meal. The cleaning gave her a few moments to think, turning over the bargains Rias suggested after Naruto made it clear he didn't want anything in particular from Kurigane. Once she settled on what she felt was the best, Valerie bounced on her toes in boredom for a lengthy minute before the hefty man finally seemed to get things in order, popping out of the kitchen babbling an apology. Wiping at the sweaty gleaming balding dome, Sunio readjusted his glasses and peered at the beautiful damper with nervous brown eyes. Ah, Valerie-sama, I wasn't expecting you to return so quickly. Not that it's a problem. He reassured hastily when he realized that might be taken as an insult. I just assumed, that is to say, well. Relax, Kurigane. Valerie's voice cracked like a whip, an irritated line growing between her eyebrows. Maybe Sasuke would get some sadistic amusement out of the human's obvious fear, but Valerie just found it to be an enormous waste of time. The longer she had to put up with his anxiety, the longer it would take to get back to Naruto. I'm accepting the contract. I'll heal your wife's liver failure and even fix that prostate cancer you haven't figured out that you have for 1,000,000 yen. The pure shock that rippled across Sunryo's plain features actually was kind of amusing, though Valerie couldn't blame him for the reaction. Her services were priceless comparatively, since while 1,000,000 yen sounded like a lot, it wouldn't even buy a car. She easily could have demanded much more from him. Patience. Better to be generous now and get any future contracts that Sunryo and his family would ever make. More money was always good, but the Gremory clan wasn't exactly pinching pennies at the moment. A reputation for fair deals and compassion among the spiritually aware humans mattered more than profit. Not to mention that her king was a kind man and probably would have offered the healing for free if he saw how frantic Kurigane was. Naruto would be disappointed in her if she used her gifts to price gouge. Are you capable of that much? Valerie prodded dryly when the silence seemed to go on, sparking Sunryo to blubber out a quick agreement and promises he'd get her the money by the end of the hour if she wanted it. He was probably afraid it was a bait and switch and that she'd give him a smirk, taunting him and saying she'd never really offer such a precious service for so little. How irritating. Snapping her fingers at the man before he got it into his head to run to the bank at that very second, Valerie frowned. Enough, we'll get the money later. It's time to go fix your wife. I assume she's at the nearest hospital and hasn't been transferred to a larger one? Yes. I actually rented this apartment just to be close by while she was undergoing treatment. It's just down the street. Sunryo smiled weakly, giving the devil girl a wide berth as he searched for his coat and shoes. It'll only take a minute to get there. And you wouldn't mind if we pretended you were my niece? People will ask less questions if it's a family visit. When Sunryo came to a slow stop, hunched over with his right foot halfway in his shoe, Valerie had enough. The bowing and scraping was getting ridiculous. Rather than answer him, the blonde just clicked her tongue and walked out the front door, squinting through the red light of the setting sun until her eyes adjusted. Let's go before visiting hours are over, uncle. Then she was striding up the street towards the medical center she could see in the distance, leaving Kurigane to fumble through the rest of his preparations and rush out after her. Once the hefty man caught up with her, Valerie slowed her pace and let him take the lead while she fell back into the storm of her thoughts. Despite her mask of confident determination, the bishop was anxious. Blood tamed her sacred gear, but if she turned her mind to it, she could still hear Sephiroth growl whispering in the back of her brain like 1,000 ghosts. Valerie could almost feel it picking away at her sanity, one slow thread at a time. If she didn't eventually master Sephiroth growl, she would go mad. But to do that required Valerie actually use it, which had risks of its own. Could she put a leash on Holy Grail of the secluded world, or would it destroy her first? She didn't know, and that scared her almost as much as becoming useless to her king did. Vaguely Valerie was aware they entered the hospital, and the stink of disinfectant and death burned her nostrils while she screwed on a polite vapid smile for any staff or visitors that happened to look her way. Between her drab behavior and the tiny spells she fired off from time to time to short-circuit every camera she saw, Valerie was confident that no one would think she was anything special. To them, she was just another unremarkable stranger out of hundreds that slipped in and out of the hospital every day to see dying relatives. She's just in the third room on the right. Sunryo murmured conspiratorially, prompting Valerie to roll her eyes to high heaven. Finally, gliding into the stale hospital room like a wraith out of myth, Valerie took a second to confirm that Aiko's fellow patients were gone from the room and that the ward's doctor wasn't lurking about behind the curtains. Once she was satisfied they were truly alone, she cracked her knuckles. Scarlet sparks flew from her nails as a minor cantrip shut and barred the door behind them. I hope you've already told her everything. Valerie sighed, turning to gaze down at the sickly woman that was gaping up at her from the bed. Kurigane Aiko looked like a strong gust of wind would kill her. Her skin was sallow and tinged yellow, drawn paper-thin over skeletal limbs and sunk into her bony cheeks. Toss in the salt and pepper strands of lanky hair hanging from her skull, and the ill woman looked like a broken little baby bird. It was enough to move Valerie to pity for the first time since she'd actually been summoned for the contract. She didn't care about Sunryo or Aiko, but in another time and in another world, it might have been her lying broken and defeated in her sick bed, waiting to die or be swallowed up by insanity. Sparing one last glance for Sunryo and the balding man's barely contained desperation, Valerie reached out her hand and began. For one moment the blonde experienced a sensation of surreal falling and abject wonder. Before her mind's eye she beheld an ink-dark abyss, the raining shadows pierced through here and there by distant stars. Green and red and blue and purple they burned, defiant against the void. And then the grail came to her, sacred and gleaming golden and full of the light of the dawn. Fire rose in her lungs and ice fell down her spine, chilling and burning and smashing with the voice of all the ghosts of creation crying out, "Save us!" Something inside Valerie splintered, but with a final wrench she stepped back and breathed in. Dark slit crimson eyes snapped open, staring at the single shining goblet that was clenched in her white-knuckled hand. Guided by instinct as old as the bones of time, Valerie held her free hand above the empty cup. Then she squeezed, nails shredding through the flesh of her palms until her own sticky blood dripped down, filling Sephiroth Grawl to the brim and then running over. Strangely, the fluid that dripped down vanished in red streamers of smoke as it hit the floor, but hazily Valerie decided not to think too closely on it. Her mind was already too full of godliness, with the consecrated, profane, secrets of life dribbling from her ears in silver streams only her eyes could perceive. Again she splintered. Drink. And again. Both of you. And again. Yet mad I am not. Not yet. A light pattering of rain dripped like free-falling tears, turning the paved paths of Kabukicho wet and slick with moisture. Between the oily asphalt beneath his heels and the flickering neon signs that burned through the misty darkness, Sasuke felt right at home. In this modern industrialized wasteland where bars lined the streets and love hotels peeked out furtively from the alleyways, Sasuke felt the shinobi inside of him truly come alive. A fluorescent dystopia wasn't the same as the feudal dirt streets of Konoha, but it was close enough for him. Narrowing his eyes as a trio of brash young hooligans came up the sidewalk towards him crowing about their latest act of vandalism, Sasuke reached up and pulled the hood of his deep blue sweatshirt down a little bit more. He didn't have time to deal with idiot children who wanted to prove their so-called masculinity. Once he passed them by without a second glance, Sasuke turned into the first alley on the left so he could lean his back against the wet brick wall. His Sharingan sputtered into being like an electric ember, glowing faintly as Sasuke looked across the thoroughfare at a particularly grimy saloon. Revenge, huh? Well, he wasn't enough of a hypocrite to complain or moralize about it. Aoki's story wasn't particularly unique or compelling. Her father had been a layabout while her mother slaved to make ends meet, gambling their family deeper and deeper into debt at various local dens. Eventually he borrowed from the wrong loan shark, and when he couldn't pay the man back, Yoshino's father had been killed as an example while her mother was told to shoulder the debt. It was a story that had happened 1,000 different times in 1,000 different worlds, and Sasuke was just jaded enough not to go out of his way to offer charity for every sob story that reached his ears. He could have asked Rias to pay the debt off if he wanted to, but Sasuke wasn't that involved in the idea of sympathy. But blood and vengeance was something that Sasuke knew down to his bones, and intrigued him enough to take the deal. Once Sasuke took Machiai Kenichi's life, Yoshino would abandon the Buddhist teachings of her family, converting to Christianity and raising her children in the faith. She would also never bargain with anyone besides Rias or her peerage. A bit too complex of a contract for a simple murder, but Yoshino had agreed to it, and Sasuke really didn't see any alternatives. She was a 14-year-old girl living on the edge of poverty. So since he couldn't get cold hard cash from her, Sasuke would at least lock down the passive power her worship generated for Gehenna's allies and make sure any descendants she had did the same. Rias might even be impressed at his forward thinking, as long as he didn't make a habit of undercutting rival pantheons in every contract he made. Exhaling a warm puff of white steam in the chilly air, Sasuke looked both ways before ambling across the street, hands in his pockets. Machiai supposedly spent his Wednesday evenings drinking his face off at Rock House Western, and if the man had stuck to schedule he wouldn't be making it home alive. When the bouncer moved to ask Sasuke for his ID, the Uchiha glared at the man so violently he just gulped and let the Uchiha pass. A man might be willing to fight for a paycheck, but humans were not so far removed from their instincts that they couldn't recognize the presence of something greater than mere mortality. The sour scent of mingled tobacco and rice wine slapped Sasuke in the face when he stepped into the poorly lit bar. It wasn't outright filthy, but there was just enough grime to set his teeth on edge and let him know viscerally that he was entering the hunting grounds for Tokyo's carnivores. Unfortunately for them, Sasuke was the apex predator in this jungle, and no buzzcut beefcake stood a chance against him. Throwing back his hood and shaking out his damp mane, Sasuke schooled his face into an icy expression before approaching the bar. "Kirin. Ichiban if you've got it, but none of that light piss," he told the bartender, not batting an eyelash at the snake tattoo that coiled up the man's bare left arm. Pale green eyes assessed the newcomer for only a moment before the man grunted and pulled a glass out from under the counter, filling it with a heady spray from the dispenser before pushing the lager towards Sasuke. There was no demand Sasuke pay up immediately, or even a threat that he'd better cover his tab before leaving. That wasn't how they did business here. It wasn't necessary, and they both knew it. Not bothering to thank the bartender, Sasuke took his drink and found his way to an empty bar stool at the very end of the counter, sliding onto scratched red leather with a frown. Sitting in plain sight as he was, hunched over his beer and nursing the golden brew, no one would suspect Sasuke was planning any trouble. They wouldn't suspect that he'd chosen his seat so that he could keep an eye on the mirror that reflected the entire bar behind him, planning the assassination of one of their frequent customers. Sasuke let the hours run late into the night, sipping down one lager after another, as he kept quiet and donned the facade of a typical sullen boy on the cusp of manhood. No one approached him or asked any questions besides the bartender, who offered to top his glass up every time it was nearly empty. When the clock struck 11:15, Machiai lurched to his feet with a burp, telling the two buddies he'd been sitting with that he was going to take a piss. Then the loan shark staggered off, scratching the bristles of his shorn head as he made his way to the bathroom. Sasuke let a cautious minute pass before slinking his own way to the bathroom, leaving his beer half-finished on the counter with a nod to the bartender. "Just going for a leak," he muttered, pushing through the pockmarked door and into the cramped facilities. With only a single stall and one urinal it wasn't much, but that was enough to make things work. The pawn's hand was already lit up with a tiny crackle of lightning by the time Machiai's instincts screamed at him that something was wrong. It only took a little tap to the shoulder for the electricity raging in Sasuke's hand to strike at Machiai's heart, sending the blonde man into cardiac arrest and paving the route to a murder without consequence. A knife or a bullet would have raised questions, but a heart attack was just natural enough that it could be ignored by a police force that didn't care about investigating the death of known criminals. Sasuke sneered down cruelly, his lip curling in contempt as the wannabe gangster twitched out his death throes on the filthy tiles, grim and urine-soaking Kenichi's clothes. "At least you didn't shit yourself," he snorted, lifting the loan shark up by the collar and shoving the man into the bathroom stall. Hopefully anyone that peeked in would assume Mach 3 was just caught up with a particularly stubborn bout of constipation. Assuming anyone bothered to look for the man at all before the bar closed. Taking a moment to carefully wash his hands with the cheap soap the bar offered, Sasuke smirked bitterly at his reflection before leaving the bathroom. He had a drink to finish and a tab to pay, and by the time anyone found Kenichi's body Sasuke would be long gone. Akino covered her mouth and yawned, scowling at the electric red numerals that were hovering above kitchen stove. Considering it was midnight she should have gone to bed hours ago, but she had promised Rias that she'd stay up and wait for Sasuke to make his way back home. Nibbling absently at a slice of cheese, the dark-haired young woman wondered how her life had turned into being Rias' matchmaker. Signing up to be her queen was one thing, but pretending to be her lover for Gehenna's rumor mill was another, and Rias' love for Sasuke only made the whole charade even more complex. Add on to that everything else Akino found herself doing to push those two together, and it was a wonder she even found time to sleep. Life would be so much easier if Rias was interested in her instead. Akino wouldn't even hesitate to return her mistress affection, and they could be together openly, and without hesitation. Gehenna might judge them for not being good little baby factories, but there was no law against noble commoner lesbian relationships. And if Sasuke still got involved after that, well, Akino wouldn't complain. Both the ruined princess and her pawn were rather delicious to look at. They were probably even more delightful to actually taste. "What are you doing?" Sasuke prodded as he stepped out of the shadows of the hallway, rubbing a towel over his wet hair. The young man had ditched his shirt at some point after entering the house, revealing a pale chest and the corded muscles of his abdomen. The faint fluorescent backlights of the kitchen appliances added an eerie glow to the pawn's skin, but it wasn't a bad look in Akino's opinion. In fact, the great undertone that shadowed Sasuke's navel was oddly attractive. It made Akino want to trace her tongue along those dimmed lines. Dragging her violet gaze away from the trim planes of Sasuke's stomach, Akino fixed her focus on his face and tried to avoid looking down. Akino had made her choice. She'd buried her desires so the people she loved could be happy without complications. She had no intention of abandoning that road now. "I didn't know you got in." Sasuke just snorted at that, as if the idea that he'd make noise entering his own home was absurd. And considering his years of training as a shinobi in the other world, maybe it was a silly notion. "Anything new happen while I was out?" Readjusting the collar of her negligee, Akino hummed in thought. Valerie made it back a few hours ago with her contract payment, which was interesting, but beyond that nothing. She very carefully didn't think of the way Sasuke's eyes flickered to her cleavage when she played with her neckline. Thinking about it meant she had to admit she wanted him to look, and that opened an entirely new can of worms no one wanted to deal with. Interesting. Sasuke drawled slowly, throwing the damp blue towel on the table before stepping forward and settling his elbows on the countertop. With the Kunou seated on the other side of the island, they were practically nose to nose, their expressions fey and intense. Out with it then. A mocking curl stretched Akino's lips, all deceptive lines and poisonous promises. Maybe it was too mocking and sadistic, but she couldn't help it. She wanted him to swallow her sharp edges while she swallowed his. There's something off about Valerie. I don't really know how you'd describe it. That contract took a lot out of her. I see. Sasuke's acknowledgement was bland and uninterested, the pawn turning away to pour himself a warm cup of water out of the tap. The action fit Sasuke's modus operandi of pretending to not give a damn about anything, but years of familiarity allowed Akino to pick out the clenched knot that lay between his bare shoulders. That actually nettled Akino a little. Valerie had a rough go of it, but there was no need for Sasuke to get all anxious about her. He had better things to focus on than Naruto's bishop. Rias for one. Akino was definitely not the other. Definitely. Combing a few errant strands out of her eyes, Akino quirked a small grin at Sasuke's tense back. That said, I'm not too worried about it. Naruto has a good handle on her, so we should have some warning if she decides to go off the rails. A sardonic chuckle burst from Sasuke's throat as he set his empty glass aside, but he didn't dispute Akino's little theory. Instead, he just turned on his heel and strode across the cramped kitchen to loom over her. True enough. Now you should be in bed at this hour rather than lurking here and stuffing your face with cheese. Is there something wrong with cheese? Akino muttered crabbily, her voice thick with irritation even as she yielded to the pressure of Sasuke's hand on the small of her back. That gesture of expectation had her rising off her stool to toddle off to bed without a second thought. If Sasuke wasn't so much bigger than her, he'd have a much harder time convincing her to do anything. But he was, towering over the Thunder Priestess like she was a little kid, and he was her fucking father. Now go crawl in. Don't worry your pretty little head over whatever nonsense Naruto's peerage gets caught up in. The demand was coded in sugary mockery, but Akino still heard the determined steel under it. Sasuke was being cautious, for some reason or another, and wanted her to stay out of the way while he and Naruto did their protective monkey man huddles. It was kind of sweet in its own way, but annoying too. Despite what Sasuke thought, Akino was more than strong enough to ride out whatever chaos Naruto's love triangle caused. In fact, maybe Akino would pay extra close attention to Valerie from now just to spite him. The weeks rolled on into the sweltering heat of summer, and by the time the end of June came around, Naruto wanted to just lay down on the road and die somewhere. Satan saga nuts, I can't handle it anymore. That's what she said? Rolling over on his belly, Naruto cracked open one glittering azure eye and glared at Revel for all he was worth. Which wasn't very much considering half his face was smushed against the hardwood floor of his fiancée's bedroom. Turn on the fucking AC for fuck's sake. Revel just turned the next page in her book, her stocking-clad legs curled up under her. A tantalizing strip of milky skin showed between the top of her striped stockings and the hem of her chaste white sundress. No more. No more. Naruto whined, running a hand through his sweaty red locks and flopping onto his back with a gasp. Someone help, I'm seeing the light. It's the end of the line for me. It's too late. Goodbye. Then he closed his eyes and went limp, tongue lolling out. Oh, and someone tell Sasuke to get rid of my dildo collection before Mom finds out about it. That would make things pretty awkward at the funeral. Snorting at that, Revel finally gave in and shut her copy of Heidegger's Being in Time. Fine, we'll go out back and swim in the pool for a few hours. Maybe that'll stop your bitching. Naruto came alive at that, surging to his feet and tearing his t-shirt off with a grin. A few beads of eye-catching perspiration glistened over his sleek stomach. Perfect. Last one out has to pay for the ramen. Then he was gone, the sound of his bare feet slapping over the floor fading into the distance as the Gremry heir raced back to his room for a change of clothes. Revel smirked fondly, shaking her head as she lazily crawled out of her bed and made her way over to the closet. She wasn't dumb enough to think she could beat Naruto to the pool, but she knew that she could still dazzle him once she got there if she picked the right outfit. Poking through the handful of swimsuits that hung from their thin brass coat hangers, Revel hummed absently in thought. She instantly dismissed the Co-Academy one-piece as too conservative, and what looked to be nothing more than a couple of red strings as too risque. Her dumbass brother had probably thought sneaking that into her wardrobe was a good idea. What would convey both sensuality and innocence? Revel still struggled sometimes with picking the perfect fashion, but oddly enough said idiot brother's lessons always came through for her. Honestly, Riser might be a bit of an idiot savant. She tried very hard not to think about the borderline sexual incestuous absurdity that came with asking Riser for fashion and romance advice. Gehenna's taboos were few, but that was one of them. Genetic bottlenecks were a very big no-no for devils. Eventually the blonde put her brother out of her mind and settled on an orange bikini with bright blue ruffles. For some reason Naruto was obsessed with the color, and it wouldn't look too bad with her complexion, so it was probably suitable. Ravel changed her clothes in a trice, keeping one wary eye on the unlocked door as she shimmied into her bikini bottoms. Her sundress she left in a crumpled ball in the corner, figuring she could clean it up later as she rushed out into the hallway. Making her way across the mansion the Gremory clan had bought and renovated once they'd decided to start spreading their influence into Kunou, Ravel repressed a grin. Sure, she'd been enjoying her book, but a private pool party with her fiancé would be better. Much better. Maybe she'd even sneak a few kisses. Ravel might even get to escalate her seduction of the redhead. Naruto had stopped treating her like a child, but he was still so irritatingly worried about doing everything perfectly. Ravel didn't need to be coddled into intimacy, and one day she'd make him see that. Ravel's bare feet pattered against the floor as she rushed past the slightly baffled-looking Yudo, ignoring the young man's half-hearted greeting. It was a little rude, but she wasn't about to stay and chat when she had Naruto waiting for her. Valerie, by contrast, was not so easily ignored, especially since Ravel raced around the corner and ran right into her, sending them both stumbling. Sorry, Ravel mumbled reflexively, sweeping her bangs out of her eyes before she stepped to the side. The other bishop didn't reply, just watching as Ravel made her way down the rest of the corridor. If not for the heavy weight of Valerie's eyes on her back, Ravel could have believed the other girl had just silently slinked off. It took a clenched jaw for the blonde to fight back the instinctive shiver that wanted to rage up her spine. Ravel had never liked Valerie, but she never had any reason to worry about her before. Compared to the mutual resentment and distant civility of before, the concern Ravel was starting to feel was very new indeed. Even Akino had seemed to notice something was strange before apparently getting distracted by something new and shiny. Maybe it was the miserable contracts that rolled in from time to time asking for the damper's miracle healing, or maybe it was the effort Valerie was putting in to master her sacred gear. Ravel couldn't be sure. But there was something dark and brittle now in that slit crimson gaze that she didn't like. Ravel didn't want to see those shadows grow any deeper. For all of their sakes. Scowling at the heat, Rainier fanned her face with an idle hand, furtively casting a tiny ice spell that brought blessed coolness to her tiny self-made breeze. If Rainier had a choice, she'd be on a white sand beach somewhere sunbathing in the nude, perhaps in the company of a few interesting individuals. But instead she got a go from mission to watch a mouth-breathing pervert and had to stand around in the urban summer watching said pervert struggle his way through a high school soccer game. What a wretched sideshow her life had become. If her mission extended into perpetuity, Rainier imagined she'd have killed herself out of boredom by the end of the year. At least she got to see that Gremory idiot run around with that delightfully miserable expression on his face. A little bit of itching powder in the little prick's jockstrap had worked wonders. Giving one last sigh of ennui, Rainier folded her hands in her lap and lounged back against the bleachers, lazily watching Haidu as he puffed and gasped his way across the field. She'd never been enough of a fan of sports to learn all the rules, but going by the clock the match would finally be over in 3 minutes. Then she could make her move. Rainier drummed her fingers on her knee, chewing the inside of her cheek for a few seconds before stopping dead. Fuck. She was actually nervous. The fallen angel wasn't afraid by any means, but she had only one chance to tie everything up neatly, and she didn't want to fuck it all up. Failure would be survivable, but that didn't mean it would be enjoyable. Though with how stupid and unaware Haida seemed to be, she didn't think it was failing was all that likely. In fact, it almost made her want to laugh. This utterly bland and mediocre boy was supposed to be the next legendary Red Dragon Emperor? Compared to Vala he was a slug, a dust mite. If God were still alive she'd accuse the old bastard of enacting some kind of twisted black comedy for his senile amusement. Pitting the grandson of the original Lucifer against some no-name human was charmingly cruel. Still, it was all the better for her. An ignorant human was no threat to her, and if he died tonight he'd never grow to be one. It was such a waste though. If Azazel hadn't taken Valian as his own son, it might have been worth it to try and turn Haidu into her personal toy. The things she could accomplish with that kind of power behind her made Rainier want to drool. Alas, there was no way any lasting truce could exist between Drake and Albion, and Rainier had no intention of cuddling an imbecilic serpent to her only to have him murder Vala in a few decades. Maybe Azazel would forgive her for it, but that didn't mean that her general wouldn't grieve at the loss. No, it was much better to just kill the boy now before he became a threat. Otherwise he'd keep drifting into the Gremory clan's sphere of influence, and eventually put the power of boosted gear at their service. Just the thought of the devils getting their hands on the Longinus put a cold tingle of fear in her spine. That could never be allowed to happen. The Grigori were already the weakest faction within the biblical pantheon. Losing even more ground could lead to subjugation or extinction at the hands of the devils or angels. Rainier swallowed dryly as the referee gave a screeching whistle to signal end of the game, and a victory for the home team. Show time. No pressure. Hopping to her feet with the crowd of fellow students, proud parents, and bored siblings, Rainier allowed herself to be swept forward by the crush of bodies. A smile slid onto her face with the practiced ease of centuries of experience, and the fallen angel waited until the herd thinned out before approaching. Issei lurked by the water cooler, wiping the sweat from his tired face with a fluffy white hand towel. It was kind of pathetic that none of his friends or family had come to see his first game, but Rainier put that callously amused thought out of her mind. She had a role to play. Haida-kun? Rainier chirped, her expression all innocence, and her voice sweeter than syrup. A minor illusion sprayed a faint blush across her cheekbones. That was a good game. Issei flushed as red as a tomato, stuttering thickly with shy confusion. Thanks? Brown eyes flickered from the young girl to the rest of the slowly dispersing crowd and back again. You're Amano-san, right? Nodding with a tiny smile, Rainier tucked a strand of her glossy midnight dark hair behind her ear. Then she peeked up through her eyelashes at the lanky brunette. Amano Yuma, we're in the same class. She clarified in a slow, halting tone. Men like Haida like shy, vulnerable girls, and she played that role to the hilt. I was wondering. Issei fidgeted, the light in his gaze shocked and almost manic. He practically exuded the air of a nervous young virgin that had never spoken to a pretty girl in his life before. Hooking him was like shooting fish in a barrel. I really like you. Please go out with me? Huh. Issei just short-circuited, his mouth falling open into a slight gape as he stared at Rainier like he just had a stroke. It was rather unflattering, if she had to say so herself. Her patience paid off though, when the blush on his face intensified and spread down his neck as he vigorously agreed. The illusory flush on Rainier's face deepened, the fallen angel nodding faintly as she took a few steps away before turning back. I see you sometimes when I'm walking to school in the mornings, so we can walk home maybe? The words came out in a demure stumble, whisper soft with the uncertain bashfulness of a girl with her first crush. Issei grinned, the redness in his skin fading slightly as he seemed to dig up a bit of male confidence. Or maybe his balls finally dropped in that moment. Either way, he consented easily to her little request and followed at Rainier's heels like an eager puppy as she led the way from Ko Academy's soccer field. What do you like to do, Amano-san? Issei forced out, holding his gym back against his side as the pair crossed out onto the streets, the dark asphalt lit up with the golden-pink light of the setting sun. Besides soccer, I guess. Rainier repressed the urge to roll her eyes, instead dropping back to link their arms together. Predictably, Issei practically steamed at the ears, leading her to wonder if she'd ever been so easily flustered. Well, to be honest, Hayato and I really like playing online games. It was even true, Rayonra chuckled inwardly. Like most fallen angels, she had a taste for the continually evolving technology humans produced, and throwing away a few hours on some MMO to grind up her levels was surprisingly fun. I'm a bit of a nerd, really. No. Issei waved his hands as best he could in an attempt to reassure his impromptu date. You don't need to feel embarrassed. There's nothing wrong with enjoying a new game, or whatever. Anyone that doesn't agree is just being an old grandpa. Rainier patted Issei's elbow, shifting slightly in a way that pressed the swell of her against his left bicep. I knew you'd understand, Issei-kun. She breathed, upgrading the level of besotted familiarity she was portraying. Between her physical beauty and the person she was pretending to be, Issei didn't stand a chance. The rest of their little stroll passed in a similar fashion, Rainier deflecting or making up pointless small talk with the ignorant human while she kept a keen eye on their surroundings. She couldn't detect any supernatural beings watching them, and even if she was really alone, there were still certain unspoken rules to go by. She could hardly whip out a spear of light and stab him with it in the middle of the street. Red sunlight slanted away as the night went on, with Issei easily distracted by the enthralling presence of a beautiful young girl finally expressing interest in him for once in his life. No doubt he had parents waiting for him at home, but between Rainier's natural beauty and the suggestive illusions she conjured, the boy completely forgot about anyone that wasn't Amano Yuma. When the clock struck 8 with an echoing chime that rang through the air, Issei finally shook off his daze and checked his watch, only for his eyes to bug out with the realization he'd frittered away 2 hours walking and chatting with the dark-haired girl. I'm sorry, Amano-san. Issei moaned, checking his cell phone to see 5 missed calls. I really have to run. Pouting at Issei with a wobble to her lower lip, Rainier brushed away the glimmering tears that crowned her eyelashes. "I'm sorry, Issei-kun," she mumbled, her fingers working at the folds of her skirt with visible nervousness. "I didn't mean to take up your time. Just before you go, could I get a hand with something? Just for a second." "Sure," Issei agreed with a hesitant smirk, slinging his thumbs in his belt loop. "I'm already late getting home, so a couple more minutes won't make a difference." Then without any hesitance he followed Rainier into a dim side alley. "Did you have something you needed to pick up?" Considering the back entrances to half a dozen businesses that lined the side street, it was a fair question to ask. Unfortunately for Hayadu, Rainier had something very different in mind. "Not quite. I just needed you to do one thing for me," she sighed, her face shadowed by the overhang of her bangs. With her back to the human, he didn't even notice when she slipped a hand into her generous cleavage and grasped cold steel with long fingers. "Okay?" A sadistic smile curved Rainier's mouth, all sharp edges and rigid heartlessness. "I need you to die for me." In that second she shed all the gentle caress in her words, leaving only hungry iron as she whipped out a black pistol and pressed the barrel against Issei's bone. "Or is that too much to ask, Issei-kun?" "It is." A new voice cut in, deep and cold with the promise of a true grave and the end to centuries. A flash of searing sacred light laid Rainier's cheek open to the bone, her very blood steaming with the purifying force left in the wake of a spear she hadn't seen in 400 years. And for the first time in ages, Rainier knew real fear. There was something to be said about mortality. Coming in sudden contact with it brought Issei a mixture of clarity and hysteria. When Yuma shoved the black barrel of a pistol against his bone, his mind went to pieces, wondering why the hell this was happening to him. He was just some average kid, so who had he offended so badly in a past life that he was going to get killed by the first girl who ever expressed interest in him? It was enough to make his mouth taste bitter as his heart lurched into a racing beat in his chest, frantically thundering along as if that was the key to remaining alive. If his heart had awareness of its own, it was probably thinking that if it just pushed enough adrenaline through his body in that split second, he'd be able to dodge a bullet from point blank. The human elevated to the superhuman by nothing but sheer willpower. How stupidly pointless. Issei couldn't even enjoy the last thing he was going to see as a living man, since Yuma's face seemed hyperreal and monstrous to him. Oh, she was classically beautiful, down to the fine glossy lashes that his adrenaline-enhanced vision could individually pick out in that last moment. But the shadows of the alley and the aggressive expression she wore twisted everything into a final minute nightmare. He blinked, and light crashed through that instant like a meteor. Something like glass shattered over Yuma's face as she reeled back, a thick streak of blood trickling down her cheek that Issei barely noticed because she suddenly looked much older and much more dangerous. The shift from a soft-faced girl to a mature woman was so dramatic and noticeable that Issei had only one thought in his skull. What the actual fuck? Was this magic? Violet eyes darkened with an internal flame, and the pistol in her hands roared. Another white-gold flash filled the world, heavy with something so ancient and undefinable that Issei had no words. He was struck mute and motionless, only able to stare in terrified wonder. Being shoved to the side and banging his head against the iron of the nearest loading bay door didn't help him come up with a way to describe it. "Fuck," Issei heard Yuma swear, with even her voice deeper and more mature as something came back around. The majestic presence intensified, making Issei pale and choke at the pressure that bore down on him. Was he going to die for the second time in 5 minutes? Well, between a bullet and a fucking eldritch abomination, he'd have definitely picked the former. A bullet was painful, but it was clean compared to the slew of images and impressions Issei struggled to put together. The sacred presence. Sleek dark blue lines moved, a pillar of golden light held in one hand as a human moved with inhuman grace. More screams, more blood, and then purple stars and magenta crystal flickered, vanishing with a shower of midnight dark feathers that shone like rainbows slick beneath the porch lamps of half a dozen closed shops. "Gods," Issei whispered, pupils blown so wide that there was only a thin-limbed ball ring of wood-brown surrounding them. His crotch was wet, but he couldn't even muster up any shame at having pissed himself. "Gods." The overwhelming sensation of pure power remained for another watchful heartbeat before dying away, sacred sorcery dispersing at the sound of a deep scoff. "Gods? Let me tell you something, kid, there were no gods here tonight. Destiny is in the hands of men." Bright blue orbs looked down at Issei's cowering form with nothing but pure contempt in them for a long second, but then that disdain shifted to a more neutral curiosity. "So that's how it is." He spoke, his voice thick with realization. "How what is?" The taller man didn't anything else though, just exhaling slowly through his nose before turning on his heel and walking away. In one moment he saved Issei's bacon, and in the next he dismissed the younger man as if he was just an uninteresting piece of scenery. The difference was enough to cause whiplash. "Wait," Issei croaked, standing on shaking knees and stumbling after the stranger who had just saved his life. "Wait." Amazingly, the magician, the only thing Issei could think of to describe him, did, glaring over his shoulder at the brunette. "What?" Contrary to his hostile bearing, there seemed to be no actual heat underlying it. That gave Issei enough courage to lick his dry lips and let the words spill out. What the fuck just happened? Just the memory of the last 10 minutes was enough to make his palms break out in cold sweat. "Who are you? Was that magic? Was Amano-san a Tengu or something? Why was she trying to kill me?" Issei couldn't help it when his voice rose from a timid whisper to a high-pitched squeal of absolute fear. He was just a normal kid, for heaven's sake. An hour ago the only thing he was thinking about was how much he hated playing soccer while hoping he might find a girlfriend, and now he'd nearly been slaughtered by some girl out of a fairy tale before getting his ass saved by some sorcerer guy. Sighing lowly, the young man settled a hand on one navy blue-clad hip and considered. Despite Issei's panicked outburst, he actually seemed more patient than he was before, perhaps deciding that Issei really was ignorant rather than just some dumb coward. It was magic of a kind. That woman wasn't a Tengu. She was a fallen angel, the kind you hear about from the Westerners. And she was trying to kill you because the God of the Christians hid a powerful magical item in your soul. "In my soul?" Issei groped vaguely at his chest, like he could just pull whatever it was out like a pocket hanky. The idea was even more ridiculous than the rest of the fantastical information he'd just gotten. At least he'd half expected to have it confirmed that magic was fucking real. The idea that he was some kind of destined chosen was just he couldn't believe it. While Issei tried to deal with the fact that his entire world had just been twisted upside down, his savior turned and strode away, his boots sure and strong as they prowled over the pavement. "Wait. You didn't tell me who you are." A nonchalant wave without even bothering to look back was the response he got. "Why the fuck am I doing this shit? I'm not the captain." "Because Naruto Gremory is a good team player and a real go-getter," Sasuke drawled from his spot leaning against the gym storage room door. The Uchiha half-heartedly thumbed through a round of Tetris on his cell phone while Naruto fucking slaved. "Look at that boy go, he's the MVP and he still pitches in after the game. Go shove your thumb up your ass, you poncy prick. If you want to make requests of the crowd, you should be doing something when you're playing then. I scored every point. You could have scored more. Son of a bitch." No, Naruto wasn't bitter at all about Sasuke's refusal to help. Why would he be? He was just that much of a generous soul. Really. In the end, Naruto decided he didn't give that much of a damn, settling for just leaving the nets rolled up in the corner while he left the soccer ball perched between them. At least he didn't have to actually take the frames in two. "Let's get out of here." Sasuke exhaled in relief, dropping his phone in his pocket and leading the way out of the dark and dusty storage room. Without thinking too deeply about it, Naruto followed. The faint sound of crickets chirping marked the warm summer evening, and Naruto found himself instinctively relaxing at the nostalgic chorus. It reminded him of his time on Team 7 in Konoha, back when he really had been a child and innocent, drilling a bittersweet little pain in his heart. "Have you noticed anything else unusual?" It was a concession to the real concern in Naruto's voice that made Sasuke answer truthfully rather than give a sarcastic grunt in reply. Akino watched her for a few days before getting bored with the whole thing, but nothing dramatic happened to interest her beyond that. And I haven't seen any more than you have. Naruto wasn't sure if he should consider that good news or bad news. On the one hand, Valerie hadn't done anything that would suggest she was going off the rails or about to have a psychological breakdown. On the other hand, Naruto wasn't blind. His bishop had been growing increasingly tired and silent as the weeks went on. Without some obvious proof to wave in her face that something was wrong, Naruto's attempts to talk to her only had her telling him over and over that nothing was wrong. "It's obviously the Longinus. Just order her to stop using it." "I thought about it," Naruto muttered, a deep frown pulling at his lips. "But I didn't think that would be fair." While he was getting more worried about Valerie as the weeks went on, he wasn't enough of a hypocrite to tell her to stop taking contracts and stop training. He never let anyone prevent him from trying to get stronger, and the thought of putting that pressure on her didn't seem right to him. As much as it irritated him, all Naruto could do was stand back and wait. When she fell, he'd catch her, but before then he couldn't just put a leash on her just to soothe his own conscience. Maybe he'd abandon Jiraiya-sensei's teachings, but he hadn't abandoned basic decency and a sense of fair play. He'd give her the chance to figure things out for herself. Giving an explosive huff, Naruto shook his head. That was enough for the moping today, he figured. He couldn't do anything about it right now, so there was no point in complaining about it. So why are you actually here? I know you didn't come to watch the game. Rias left a few things in the clubroom and I needed some air. Naruto smirked snidely, readjusting his gym bag as he jogged ahead of Sasuke so he could walk backwards and get a front row seat to the entire show. Oh? Sounds to me like she's got your balls in her purse, making you run errands while she gets to chill at home. The Sharingan flickered very briefly in Sasuke's gaze, just long enough to signify promised violence before fading back to cold black. Devil eyes weren't exactly kosher among mortals unaware of the supernatural. I offered because I wanted the walk anyway, and it was no skin off my back. Maybe if you understood the concept of give and take, you wouldn't still be failing to balance your romantic relationships. Involuntarily, Naruto winced. Fuck man, that was a low blow. Then his expression turned wicked. Besides, at least I can say I have romantic relationships, as in more than one. You've only got the one, and you still can't get it in. That makes you the dud and me the stud. Sasuke just cocked a sardonic eyebrow. From here it looks to me like you've got two eager blondes and you still haven't gotten anywhere. Rias needs gentle handling a lot of the time. What's your excuse? Performance issues? All the salt from that ramen stacking up? Listen here, motherfucker. Shut up. Don't tell me to shut up, you shut up! Naruto. Sasuke said very clearly and very coldly, crimson flooding back into his eyes without any regard for who might see it. Shut up. There wasn't any teasing or irritation in Sasuke's suddenly serious demeanor, and that more than anything made Naruto pipe down. As soon as did it hit him. The overpowering metallic reek of blood. Ah! He hummed, his pupils contracting as he turned to look up the walkway leading to the old dormitory housing the Occult Research Club. A human wouldn't have noticed anything with their dulled senses, but the two devils could smell the gore from more than 100 meters away. There was so much of it that Naruto grimly suspected someone had either been murdered in the clubhouse or had been wounded elsewhere before making their way inside to die. Let's go. Dropping his gym back in the bushes, Naruto rushed up the sidewalk with Sasuke hot on his heels. But once they reached the front doors, they slowed to a cautious creep. Naruto reached out and pushed, the double doors swinging inward with barely any pressure. The lock was broken. He gave Sasuke a significant look at that, stepping inside on silent feet and with shallow breaths. Which was probably ideal, since even that was enough to make him want to throw up. A full inhale might even have him spewing chunks everywhere. Tiptoeing their way up the stairwell, Naruto grimaced at the thick puddle of blood he stepped in, the ruby liquid staining his white trainers and soaking into his socks. Every step after that had sticky cold syrup slurping up between his toes. Get ready, he whispered, bringing his hand up in a ready position that would let him call on a Rasengan at any moment's notice. Behind him he knew Sasuke was tense, and ready to launch a Chidori at the first sign of hostility. As prepared as he could be, Naruto slipped into the main clubroom before stopping halfway through the door in shock. Fuck. He cursed loudly, dropping all thoughts of combat, and lunging across the room to hover over a bundle of blood and black feathers. What the hell happened to you? What the fuck do you think? Reina growled, coughing out a hefty mouthful of red-tinged phlegm. She cracked open one bloodshot purple eye to give him a hateful stare before shuddering and falling back into a stupor. She didn't seem to have any energy for arguing, so Naruto didn't press her, stripping off his t-shirt before kneeling down to press the balled-up cloth against the gaping wounds that lined her stomach. It didn't do much to staunch the flow of precious vitality, but it was better than nothing. Finding a dying fallen angel on the floor of the clubhouse was pretty high on the list of things he wouldn't have expected to see today, but if she'd been attacked he supposed she didn't have anywhere else to go. Gehenna and Michelin were allies, and she could hardly limp her way home if someone was hunting her. Idiot. Sasuke murmured, reappearing with a thick glass bottle in his hand that Naruto recognized on sight as being from Ravel's Phoenix Tear stash. His bishop's paranoia and insistence on hiding at least one bottle in almost every room had been annoying as fuck, but he definitely saw the benefits now. Hold her head up. Ignoring the crimson sludge practically coating his palms, Naruto slid one hand under Reiner's back and propped up the unconscious woman so she was mostly upright. Do it. Sasuke sneered but didn't argue, unscrewing the cap before dumping the precious regenerative elixir all over Reiner's abdomen. Steam rose as wounds closed, and her breathing seemed easier, but she was still deathly pale. The tears could heal injuries but not regenerate organs, which means she might still die if she'd be gouged too deeply. Wrap her in some blankets. Sasuke ordered, jumping back to his feet before rummaging back around in Rias' desk. We're going to have to teleport her right to the house and get Valerie to heal her. We don't want to deal with the Grigori asking about why their agent died in our office. Glaring at the Uchiha, Naruto laid her gently back down before doing as he said. He wasn't doing it for Sasuke, but that school uniform had seen better days and whoever had fucked up Rainier had done a number on her clothes too. Let's just get out of here. The soft pink rays of the dawn pierced through the shadow of the night, but to Issei it made little difference. He'd spent the entire evening after getting home lying in his bed and staring at the ceiling. His eyes felt swollen and dry, but sleep was just as far out of reach by the time morning came as it had been when he'd sprawled over the mattress. How could he sleep when everything had changed? Issei scrubbed at his face, wondering when he'd slipped from jumping at every creak that rattled through the house to just lounging fully numb. If Amano came back to kill him, there was nothing he could do to stop her beyond hoping that the spear-wielding magician showed up again to save him, so why bother being prepared to run? At this point, he couldn't really say his life belonged to him. Eventually, his alarm clock shattered the silence with its demand that he wake up and get ready for the day, but Issei shut it off with a heavy slap. What was the point of school? What was the point of anything when some monster could just jump out of the shadows and kill him because some god had decided to curse him the day he was born? He'd only lived so long out of sheer dumb luck. Well, Issei decided as he sluggishly got to his feet. If he was doomed to die, at least he could do his parents the favor of not being in the house when they came for him. There was no reason they needed to get caught up in the shitstorm his life had turned into. Trudging through his morning routine like a zombie, Issei showered and crammed down a few slices of half-buttered toast before heading out. His parents were probably worried at his lack of energy, but Issei couldn't even begin to bury the horrors buzzing in the base of his skull. A warm breeze blew up the street towards him, carrying the sweet scent of some housewife's apple pies, and Issei felt his eyes water. Fuck. He didn't want to die. Why did this have to happen to him? Issei clenched his jaw so tightly it was a wonder his teeth didn't crack. He glared at everyone he came across. He made his way to the academy. It was a far cry from his usual friendly self, but he couldn't help it. Amano had proven he couldn't trust anyone. The salaryman standing outside the local coffee shop? Maybe he was a kitsune. The little girl sitting on the park swing set? Could be born to a family of magicians. The world was much bigger and much scarier than most people thought it was. They had no damn clue that the power of science and human rationalism had nothing on forgotten spirits and dying gods. They had no idea that there really were monsters under their beds, waiting for a chance to strike out and kill. Yo, Issei. Squinting at Matsuda as his friend from middle school jogged up to meet him, Issei wondered. He wondered if the other boy's love for porn was normal for a teenaged boy or if Matsuda was secretly one of those Western incubus demons. He wondered if that shaved head was natural, or if Matsuda was a balding monkey yokai in disguise. Did he really know the other boy at all? Or was there some monstrosity lurking underneath that human face? Issei shivered, hunching his shoulders and nodding back unenthusiastically. Hey. So listen. Matsuda lowered his voice conspiratorially, keeping one eye out for any eavesdropping yearmates as they made their way to their classroom. I was poking around on the net, and I managed to get my hands on a few vids. Top-tier stuff, uncensored. Wada say we get a hold of Motohama and head back to my place to watch them? My parents are out of town for the rest of the week. Normally the prospect of being able to watch illegal uncensored bootlegs of Japanese AV actresses sold to Western audiences would get Issei's interest. Being able to slither off to one of his friends' houses for the evening for a porn and pizza marathon without having to worry about anyone's parents popping in would have him bouncing off the walls in excitement. But Issei couldn't get his mind away from last night. Every time he closed his eyes he was back there, with images of violence and blood shining behind his eyelids while the remembered taste of gunpowder simmered on the back of his tongue. Ass and tits and panties all seemed like nothing next to magic and death and terror, and perving around like it was just any one other day was simply impossible. His life was different. He was different, and Issei knew that there was no going back into the comfort of blissful ignorance from here. Nothing would ever be the same again, even if he never saw another supernatural creature for the rest of his life. Now Issei knew that there was something behind the curtain. The brunette smiled weakly at his old friend, his chocolate-brown gaze glazed and dull as he tried not to wonder which one of the classmates filtering into the room wasn't human. Nah, not tonight. I need to get caught up on my studying and Ka-san has been really putting the whip to me lately. Sorry. Matsuda looked baffled. Are you sure, man? Yeah. Issei sighed, acid burning in the back of his throat as he pretended nothing at all was wrong. I'm sure. It is what it is. Can't do anything about it. Rias scowled down at the stain left behind by Rainer's blood on her clubroom floor. She and her peerage had quietly mopped up the mess without alerting the students or the staff of the academy, but it had still sat long enough to set in. At least the hardwood was dark. According to a quick internet search, once she gave it a week or two to oxidize, the crimson tint would be darkened into a shade much less noticeable that wouldn't ruin the wood. Having to replace the floor would lead to too many questions from the school, and the cat would be out of the bag. I still don't know why you don't want to call Gramps in. Technically he's the administrator around here, so you'd think a student almost getting shanked on campus would be right up his alley. Looking away from the squiggly stain that had seeped in right beside her desk, Rias settled a considering state on her sullen nephew. She was pretty sure she'd already told him why they couldn't call in the clan that morning, but considering how drawn out and exhausted he seemed, she could probably cut him some slack. They might not always get along, but that didn't mean she had to be a shrew about it. Because while Rainer came here for sanctuary, as she should, considering the Grigori are allies of Gehenna, we don't have enough information to make that call. We don't know who attacked her, or if she attacked someone else. We don't know if the Grigori have any more assets in Ko, or if she is the only one. We don't even know if she'll live or die. Until she wakes up, we won't have any answers. And until we get those answers, it's better to handle this informally. Right. Naruto muttered, dropping the mop back in the bucket before knuckling at one bloodshot eye. Plausible deniability. As long as the clan doesn't know, anything we do can be passed off as ignorant kids being kids. But if they do, then they're accountable if Rainer fucked with the wrong faction. Because of giving support, and whatever. Rias hummed a low agreement in the back of her throat, hefting the bucket up so she could dump the dirty water out in the private clubhouse bathroom. It left a pinkish ring in the bottom of the tub that she had to spend a few minutes spraying at with the detachable shower head. Coming up behind the ruined princess with a smut jug of bleach he'd probably pilfered from one of the janitor closets, Naruto poured the industrial cleaner in the tub to make sure the porcelain was left pristine and spotless. Listen, I'm gonna head out. Me and Sasuke are gonna run the streets for a bit, and see if we can pick anything up. I'll let Akino know she doesn't have to keep a watch out when I go by. Good luck. Rias acknowledged, twisting off the water and drying her hands. Just try not to stay out too late and keep in contact. Otherwise we'll be wondering if you two have a foul of whatever it was that savaged Rainer. Yeah? Sure thing, Mom. See you later. Then her nephew was gone, leaving Rias alone with her thoughts and her worries. Contrary to the cool dispassion she displayed when answering Naruto's question, Rias was much more concerned than she let on. It wasn't necessarily that there was someone out there that could hurt or kill Rainer. Rias could do that herself without too much trouble. Rather, it was the thought that there was someone out there that would. Even if Rainer was arrogant and personally unpleasant, she was still what amounted to a de facto ambassador of the Grigori. An assault on her could be taken as an assault on the entire fallen angel government. Someone that was willing to do that had to be ignorant, insane, or absurdly powerful. Obliviousness and madness were easy enough to deal with, since it would just mean some idiot had shot first without thinking about who he was shooting. Someone like that was easy enough to put down, if a bit of an inconvenience to sniff out. Someone who was so powerful they didn't have to be afraid of tangling with the Grigori, though that was someone that could kill Rias and her makeshift family without breaking a sweat. Running to her father without trying to solve the issue on her own would look weak and get the clan involved, but the risk of violence would probably be reduced. Unless it had been more than one person that had gone after Rainer. An organized group, or even a formal faction. The thought of Ko descending into a battleground for a conflict between the Grigori and the Edo Yukai made her guts turn to ice. Something like that might escalate to a full-on war between the Shinto pantheon and the biblical one. I hope you're not lurking here waiting for me to start looking over more paperwork. Because I'll tell you right now, Bucho, I am so done for the day. Curving her mouth into her best effort at a disaffected smile, Rias shook her head at her approaching queen. Nothing like that, I just thought I would ask if there was anything here you wanted to take home before we lock up. Akino pursed her lips, letting her gaze rove across the bookshelves and the papers scattered over Rias' desk. The violet light in her eyes went flat as she studied the mismatched bloodstains that marked the floor of the clubroom from one side to the other. No, I can't think of anything I'd want to bring. Let's just go before it gets too much darker. Stuffing a few books in her school bag, Rias very carefully didn't comment on the icy neutrality in Akino's voice or the fact that a devil's vision was hardly reduced at night. All right, she declared instead, slinging her leather messenger bag over one shoulder. You go first since I have the keys. Neither one of the young women spoke as they made their way out into the cool evening air, locking each door carefully behind them until they were standing on the winding path that led back down to the rest of the academy grounds. Long minutes passed as they walked together in silence, Rias turning over the situation in her mind in an attempt to find the best way to approach it. Akino was a very direct girl in general, but she could be touchy about her childhood and certain other personal issues. Would you like to stop somewhere for ice cream on the way home? She offered eventually. Frowning faintly, Akino looked over to stare quizzically at the redhead. Well, I wouldn't say no if you wanted to buy one, but why? Didn't you just eat your supper like an hour ago? You can't be that hungry, can you? Ah, well. Rias shrugged, studying the distant horizon. Pink and indigo mingled at the skyline with the dying of the sun. But soon enough the sun would return, reborn and vibrant. It made her wish their lives were that easily renewed. I thought maybe you'd like something a bit sweet. The confusion on Akino's face intensified for a heartbeat, before it was swept away by realization. Black venom and a cold burning anger twisted the half-breed's expression into a rictus of remembered betrayal. So you thought I needed a bit of comfort food? Like I was a sad little girl all upset at seeing someone I cared about get hurt. I didn't. Let me tell you something, Rias. I don't care if we share blood and it was all over your floor. That man gave up his rights to be my father a long time ago, and that woman has never been my sister. Akino clenched a fist so tightly the tips of her nails bit into the soft flesh of her palm. I'll defend her, because that's part of the alliance between Gehenna and the Grigori, and it's bigger than me. But I'm not going to play happy fucking families with her. Dark heavy bags hung under her eyes. Rainer's head was still spinning from the combination of fatigue and anemia, but she was alive. She'd come face to face with the pointed end of the spear of destiny and survived, which wasn't something many other people could claim. Maybe she'd brag about it when she made it back to Mictlan and bask in Middle's impotent envy. Here. Turning away from the window, Rainer faced Rias Gremory's little Nikomata Rook with an expectant smirk. About time. She drawled thanklessly, taking the dark blue hooded sweatshirt the girl offered. A red and white fan was emblazoned on the back, but she refused to give much thought to the fashion choices of a bunch of devil brats. Clothes were clothes at this point. Unfortunately, her brazen nudity didn't seem to embarrass Tuja as she accepted a pair of baggy sweatpants from the Nikomata. How sad Rainer could have used the laugh. Instead, those amber orbs just watched passionlessly as Rainer wriggled into the hoodie. If she wanted to seduce the girl, she'd actually be a bit offended at the lack of interest in her perfectly shaped, or the smooth, pale skin of her stomach. I suppose they want me comfortable before the interrogation? The sarcasm thickening her tones didn't make Kaneko balk, and with a click of her tongue Rainer just gave it up. There was no fun in teasing someone that had too much water in their veins to respond. It was only worth it when she could see the way their rage flickered across their nerves. Anything less was simply too tepid to enjoy. Slinging the black baggy pants on in a way that gave little peeks at her navel when she stretched, Rainer tied off the waistband before heaving an irritated sigh. Out of the way then. And without waiting for Kaneko to move, Rainer pushed on past. A violet stare in the same shade as her own greeted her once Rainer made it down to the first floor. Akino leaned against the wall with her arms crossed and a blank mien. Her half-sister was determined not to acknowledge their relation in any meaningful way, and Rainer was perfectly content to let her. Without pausing to even recognize Akino's presence, Rainer kept moving until she was standing before the two Gremory brats, one hand on her hip while the other hung loose. I'm told the two of you had your hands in cleaning up the scene and taking me back here. The Grigori won't forget that. It was as blandly polite as Rainer could manage. Then she went to flee out the front door. Wait, what? Naruto shouted, rushing ahead to bar Rainer's way with an utterly baffled expression on his face. That's it. You need to tell us what's going on. We found you bleeding to death in our clubhouse. You owe us that much, don't you think? Maybe if Rainer was a kinder person in general, or maybe if she was at the least better disposed to devils, she'd give a damn about the kid's curiosity. Sure, he'd helped her out of a tight spot and she wouldn't forget that if there came a time to return the favor, but that didn't entitle him to start sticking his brash nose in her business. Looking down at the indignant redhead with a glacial glare, Rainer denied him. The business of the Grigori is the business of the Grigori, not that of Gehenna or the Gremory clan. Shrouding herself in the facade of official sanction seemed like the easiest way to deflect questions. Never mind that she hadn't actually waited for orders from her superiors before deciding to take out Hayato. The Red Dragon Emperor was just too dangerous to be left alive, especially with the way he'd seemed to be drifting into the Gremory heir's orbit. If she'd reported back with a success, she knew that Azazel and Shemhazai would pardon going outside mission parameters. Even her useless so-called father would support her. But now that Hayato was still alive and there seemed to be some new player taking an interest in him, a player powerful enough to command true Longinus no less, things might start going off the rails. Questions were going to be asked by the Gremory clan if the children decided to run to their higher-ups, and in the end she might be dismissed as having failed her mission. Which was unacceptable. The mere idea of failing in Azazel's eyes was enough to turn her blood to ice. The reality of it would be unbearable. So she needed to get out from under the eyes of the devils. Rainier had to regroup and move up some alternative plans. Haida was still alive, but so was she, and unlike her, the human boy was nowhere near trained in his ability to use his powers. As long as she wasn't found out by that spearman again, she could still clean this mess up. No. Rainier eventually murmured, keeping her voice low and non-confrontational. I can tell you that I wasn't in conflict with another pantheon. I can tell you that Gehenna will be treated as an ignorant bystander. I can tell you no laws were broken and that this won't become a clusterfuck. Or at least she hoped, since that spear-throwing bastard had never claimed to be anyone's emissary. Drawing that tattered remains of her dignity up around her like a cloak, Rainier straightened her spine and lifted her chin. But I can't spill the beans for you. What my superiors have asked me to do isn't something I can tell outsiders about. This conflict might prove that I'm a weakling, but I won't let it prove that I'm a traitor. The formal speech and humble words galled Rainier like swallowing a chicken bone. She wanted to cough and spit and scoff at the naive kids that were trying to play hero without even knowing all the facts. In fact, if she were honest, Rainier would probably come across as a villain to the innocent little kids that the Gremry clan had sent to Kunou. But pretending to be a sober patriot made the Gremry brats back off and let her pass through, so with a final austere nod to Naruto she escaped out into the dark streets. So that's it then, Yuto declared crabbily, folding his arms and staring at the front door with a slightly peeved expression. While he'd gotten used to it in Gehenna, Yuto still didn't enjoy being ignored. Rainier's eyes had passed over him without recognition, the fallen angel dismissing him as practically equal to another piece of furniture. Even when she was only alive because of their generosity, she was still arrogant. Thinning his lips in irritation, Naruto turned away from the door and shoved his hands in his pockets. I guess so. The Gremrier wasn't any happier at being brushed off, but they all knew that there wasn't much else they could do. Rias tapped her chin in thought, shifting her gaze from the sullen blonde to the sulking redhead. I wonder if at this point we should speak to Father or Surzex about this. Informally, of course, but there might be some underlying currents we need to be aware of. However you approach it, this entire series of events is certainly irregular. Yeah, that should be no problem. Naruto grinned at the other two. We can keep it all on the down low if you're fine with waiting until Gramps and I go out for dinner in a few weeks. Sooner or later he'll call me up for another evening of fancy wine and old man wisdom like he always does, so it won't look odd. His earlier annoyance was washed away in an instant now that Naruto had something concrete to do. Yuto watched the two redheads through half-lidded blue-gray eyes, leaning back against the wall like a good servant would. In any other household he'd exist to be seen and not heard, but here he was comfortable enough to offer his own thoughts. Even if we can't do anything openly for a few weeks, that doesn't mean we have to do nothing at all. Sasuke is still out wandering and I'm sure we can turn our next few contractors into spies. Makes sense. Naruto shrugged, offering his support to the suggestion without hesitation. If you've got enough eyes and ears out there, you'll eventually find out something worthwhile. It's not like we can just follow her around. That could lead to some pretty uncomfortable questions, both from Rainier and from any of the big guns she tattles to. Unlike Naruto, Rias was reluctant to agree, and Yuto knew it was her overprotective nature at work. Naruto might be the more reckless of the two Gremry devils, but he didn't coddle them either. Sending out the members of her peerage to walk the beat when there was an unknown third party in the town would probably have her biting her nails with apprehension. Fine. Rias eventually conceded, massaging her tense temples with pale fingers. I will have to sit down with Ravel and draw up a few plans and contingencies, but fine. We'll do it your way. Then she turned and stalked off, muttering mutinously under her breath. Once the wound-up ruined princess vanished from sight, Naruto let out a gusty sigh and grinned at Yuto, his smile a little too sharp and a little too wide. There was a certain hunger in that smirk that the blonde knight identified with. A thirst to take up his sword and answer the call of combat. How bad could it be anyway? Rainier might have gotten thrashed, but the fallen angel was weaker than almost every member of both peerages. Only Valerie and Gasper would struggle against her. And whoever had beaten her hadn't been strong enough to land the final blow. Well, easy victory or not, Yuto wanted to get out in the world and do something for once. Galilei wasn't growing any younger and Yuto refused to let old age steal his revenge just because Rias wanted to be ridiculously cautious. By the time August barreled into town with choking heat and blazing sunny days, Naruto was entirely fed up with the whole damn charade. In the end, Amano Yuma never returned to school, and beyond a few sightings it seemed like Rainier had entirely vanished into the shadows. Their attempts to drum up more information from the rumor mill were worthless. Even his under-the-table questions to his grandfather during their clan business chats only got him a few warnings to be careful and keep his nose clean. What a fucking waste of a whole month. The only bright side in the entire shitshow was that a few weeks back Valerie seemed to snap out of her funk for some reason and had pretty quickly bounced back from the edge of exhaustion. Naruto tried to feel properly grateful for it, but the atmosphere at the house had grown too tense for such simple joys. The sheer lack of even a scrap of information from any of their sources hadn't calmed their makeshift home. Instead, it had sent them all spiraling into anxiety, as it became clear that whoever fucked Rainier up was very good at covering their tracks. Too good to be some two-bit chump they could spank around for a laugh. The only other explanation was that Rainier had gotten jumped by someone who decided to immediately run out of town, but that didn't really fit with Rainier's sudden disappearing act. Her avoidance of the school had directed their suspicions there, but after a subtle interrogation of every known supernatural attending the academy, they just turned up a dead end. Maybe it was a bit pointlessly obsessive for them to get so worked up over someone smacking around a grunt from the Grigori, but none of them could help it. Life had made them all paranoid, and for good reason. The man that forgot to guard his back was the man that ended up face down in a ditch somewhere with his throat slit. A reality that Naruto had personal experience with. Fuck. Exhaling slowly, Naruto let the shower spray run down the tense muscles of his back as he rested his forehead against the cool tiles of the shower stall. He was dreading when the summer break ended and he actually had to go back to classes at the end of the month. Not having to deal with his naive classmates actually helped with the stress. But soon enough it would back into the daily grind of pretending to be just another human, cramming to complete his assignments, and play a sport he didn't even like. Fuck me. That's exactly what I'm here to do. Whirling around at the sudden intrusion with his heart leaping into his throat, Naruto was fully prepared to rip a new asshole into whoever thought it was a great idea to interrupt his me time. Or at least that had been his plan, until his eyes registered just exactly what he was looking at and his brain short-circuited. Valerie stood under the raining spray of the shower head, her crimson eyes glowing with soft amusement and a certain restless energy. The water had soaked into her straw-yellow mane, plastering her strands to her skin and darkening them to a heavy goldenrod hue. She wouldn't look at all out of place gardening outside during a spring shower. Except for being completely and totally nude, streams of moisture running down her milky flesh. It trailed slick and wet, dripping down her arms and even through the crevice of her shapely, tracing a single line over her taut stomach to soak the gleaming curls above her sex. Naruto realized two things in that moment. One, that he was as hard as steel, the meat of his prick throbbing so fiercely with arousal that it nearly hurt. Second, that Valerie was naked in his shower with him. "What are you doing?" he breathed, his pupils blown wide as he scrambled back that scant few inches so his back was pressed up against the wall. Dimly, Naruto wondered if he should have expected something like this. He'd always gone pretty slow with both his bishops, but he did know that they weren't entirely satisfied with that pace. More than once they'd gone on the offense to push the stakes up another notch. Valerie narrowed her eyes at Naruto's retreat, stepping closer and closer until her breath fanned against his face, and the hardened tips of her were just brushing up against his chest. What I should have done a long time ago. A single hand came up to tease over the muscles of Naruto's stomach, the points of Valerie's nails just barely scraping over his skin in a way that had him sucking in a desperate breath while his rod twitched in desperate yearning. This was wrong, Naruto decided. He shouldn't be letting himself get backed into a corner by an overeager and too horny damper. When he'd accepted Valerie's affection, he'd promised himself that he'd treat her right. That he wouldn't rush things with her and do anything that would leave them with shame and regrets. By rights, he should push her away and gently but firmly explain to her why this attempted seduction couldn't go any further. And then that hand wrapped around his shaft, and all thoughts of what were right and wrong fled Naruto's mind as he groaned. Issei bent over the sink in the school bathroom, splashing his face with a handful of cold water and wincing as it stung the bags hanging under his bloodshot eyes. He'd learned to rest easier after months without encountering hide nor hair of the supernatural, but he could never quite go back to the way it used to be. Ignorance was impossible to reclaim, and being constantly on the lookout for demons or devils that might jump out of the shadows at him was taking its toll. His grades had slipped, and only by working his balls off was he able to get them back up without his mother noticing. His libido had dwindled to practically nothing, and he stopped going over to his friends' houses for porn night. There were even a smattering of gray strands working their way through his chocolate-shaded mane. In short, Issei was a wreck, and while he'd cobbled together enough pieces of himself to function in society, it didn't work the way it used to. He was too serious and too sullen for his old friends, and too suspicious to make new ones. His possible friendship with Naruto Gremory had withered to nothing when he realized the other boy could very well be a devil in disguise. Pursing his lips at his haggard reflection, Issei wiped the water from his face with the back of his sleeve before slinging his back up over his shoulder. Whatever, there was no point moping about it now. Issei turned away from the mirror, letting one hand drift up to hover over the concealed rosary hanging from his neck as he left the bathroom. His research into the occult had led him to vague and often contradicting results, but one of the most common things to pop up was the ability of holy artifacts to ward away evil spirits. Maybe wearing a crucifix or stuffing his pockets with ofuda wouldn't do anything for him, but it brought him some peace of mind as he struggled through his school life. "Excuse me?" Issei whispered as he dodged around a trio of freshmen, careful not to meet their eyes or do anything that might attract attention. It was better to be uninteresting and wimpy than it was to stand out and get people's notice. A mediocre guy with mediocre grades who played on the soccer team with mediocre skill wasn't remarkable to anyone. "Excuse me?" It was best to keep it that way, because even if he couldn't prevent someone like Amano who was aware of the artifact he supposedly had coming after him, he could at least keep his head down and not catch the eye of some passing yokai. Fleeing out into the evening streets with his head hung low and his hands in his pockets, Issei looked both ways before taking his round route home. It would take him a bit longer to avoid all the back alleys and quiet paths he'd once used to cut down on travel time, but it kept him in the crowd as long as possible. If his mother knew how much fear ruled him, she'd break down in tears. That knowledge was bitter on the back of his tongue, but it didn't convince him to change his habits. Better to be alive and live in fear than to live fearlessly and be dead by the end of the week. That was just the way his life had to be, and for that Issei hated them. He hated Amano Yuma and her cruel smile. He hated all the ghosts and all the demons that went bump in the night feeding on humans for their survival. Issei even, in those darkest moments, hated all the gods that had left humans to be the prey of monsters. He hated and hated and hated until he could barely see straight. Excuse me?" Issei frowned, peering through the seething crowd of human bodies for the source of that loud cry. Again and again it rang out, sounding more dejected each time until he broke through a pair of particularly ornery salarymen to lay eyes on a young foreign girl. Glittering emerald orbs surveyed the stomping parade of strangers that moved on by, lit up with a combination of hope and sadness. "Excuse me?" she called again, half reaching for a tired-looking housewife that shrugged her off without a word. Long golden tresses cascaded out beneath a thin white headwrap, layering over verdant robes that tickled Issei's mind with a faint sense of recognition. A nun, he settled on after reviewing the scattered bits of knowledge he'd scrounged up on the internet. She was a Catholic nun, and a pretty young one at that. Damning the guilt that surged up in his when he thought about just leaving her to figure things out on her own, Issei coughed into his fist and stepped forward. "Hello?" he greeted, smiling weakly when those wide electric green eyes settled on him. "I couldn't help but overhear that you were having some trouble." For a long moment the foreign blonde just stared. Maybe she was that shocked by the idea that someone would just decide to offer their assistance after spending gods knew how long pleading with strangers she met on the street for help. Then a brilliant and innocent smile curved her little pink mouth, transforming the nun from an odd little girl to a beautiful young woman. Her radiance even cut to Issei's heart, despite his efforts to ignore all things female in the last few months. Would you be willing to lend me a moment of your time?" It took Issei a moment to puzzle through her stilted words, the girl's odd accent throwing him off and making it very clear he was dealing with someone that probably hadn't ever even visited Japan before. But eventually he gave a sharp nod, his grin becoming more real as he stepped closer. His instinct warned him to be wary, but there was just something so pure and gentle about her that he couldn't help but let his guard down a bit. "Sure, that's what I'm here for, sister." Clapping her hands with glee, the girl bowed bashfully in a clumsy attempt to ape Japan's customs. I was trying to get to this address, but I don't know where exactly to go." She handed Issei a thick placard that had numbers and a street number marked out with the bold black ink of a permanent marker. Issei studied the address for a moment, scratching his head in thought as he scanned back through his memory of Kunou and the streets he'd once roamed. "If I had to say, I'd guess this is the address for one of those apartment complexes down towards the docks." He motioned off behind her. "You'll want to head down that road right to the end, and then take a left. You'll probably have to ask for directions again, but you'll be pretty close at that point." Gazing off in the direction he'd indicated with a look of concentration on her bubbly face, the nun hummed in thought before smiling innocently at him again. "Thank you very much, sir." She bowed again, making Issei wince and wave her off. "Oh, come on, none of that. You're making me feel like an old man," he moaned, making sure to smirk teasingly at her so she knew he was joking. Issei had the feeling if he didn't she'd take him seriously and get even more worked up. "It was nothing, really. I was glad to help." Issei winked at her, feeling his heart lighten for the first time in weeks just for doing a simple good deed for a stranger. Then he turned away, intent on making his way back home before it got too dark. After 3 steps he was pulled to a stop by a steel grip on the sleeve of his uniform jacket. The blonde murmured, looking down at the pavement with a high flush on her cheekbones as she bit her lip. Her visible shyness contrasted with the unyielding force of her hand that made Issei stop and listen to her again. Before you go, could I have your name? I'd like to pray for you and your kindness. Issei studied the trembling hand that was wrapped up in his jacket and the eager but nervous shine in the nun's eyes as she met his gaze. Then he smiled, jabbing one thumb in his chest like all the old shounen heroes he read about when he was a kid. My name's Haida Issei. How about you? Oh. My name is Asia Argento, Issei-san. I hope to see you again someday. The bell signaling the end of the period buzzed, and Valerie immediately dropped her pencil to massage her cramping hand. That was enough of that, and she didn't care enough about her grades in some human school under a false identity to try and frantically scribble out the last answer before the teacher collected their tests. Gathering her supplies back up and cramming them in her pencil case, the blonde snapped the lid shut before dropping the little box in her skirt pocket. A few of her classmates tried to get her attention as Valerie made her way out of the schoolroom, but she brushed them all off without a word. The only people in her class worth any attention were Ravel and Kaneko, and neither of them had bothered to look up when she walked by. Just as well, since Valerie wasn't in a talking mood anyway. She was planning to eat lunch with her king and make the most of the only time she could actually talk to him during the school day. Getting caught up with anyone else would just be a waste of time. Ah man, I just know that I flunked. Hey, what was your answer for question 7? I remember the Shimizu clan, but I forgot the other 2. That was actually alright. Not great, but a lot easier than I thought it was. Valerie let the chatter wash over her as she moved with the crowd, her braided forelocks bouncing with every step. Their words were loud and obnoxious and full of pointless mediocrity, but they were easily ignored. No mortal tone could compare to the ringing voice of Sephiroth Grawl. Vanish, O night. Sighing, Valerie bit the inside of her cheek and let the sweet flavor of her own blood coat her tongue. It brought her senses back to the here and now, tricking her fevered brain and driving out the otherworldly presence of the Grail. It was a poor substitute for a real sustenance of power, but it would cage the restless spirits in her mind for a few minutes. Over the months she'd learned to somewhat accommodate the consequences of her sacred gear, finding a balance that let her sleep at night without waking up screaming. Valerie was nowhere near being able to master the mind-crushing parasite, but she'd become adjusted to its moods and quirks. She was sane enough to stomp down on the voices and impressions that bubbled up from the cracks in reality. Or perhaps Valerie was just barely insane enough to have gotten used to things no mortal mind was supposed to comprehend. She quickened her steps, power walking to the end of the corridor, and down one floor so she could wait impatiently outside Naruto's classroom. Come on, come on. He was more sociable with the humans than they deserved, and it made him always a few minutes late getting out of class. Once he knew what she needed, he'd let her drink directly from the thrumming life in his veins, reinforcing the mental change she was slowly learning to construct around the ancient relic that was bound to her bones. Oh hey. Naruto grinned easily as he bounced out into the hallway, his blue gaze lit up with good humor. Contrary to what she'd expected after ambushing him in the shower a few days ago for stress relief, there wasn't a single line of tension in his entire body. I hope you haven't been waiting out here for too long. Humming lowly in the back of her throat, Valerie deliberately raked her eyes over the short-sleeved white button-up that didn't conceal the redhead's muscled biceps. It was only for a few seconds. Her little inspection didn't go unnoticed, and Naruto's face darkened with a flicker of concealed desire. I stashed a few lunches up in one of the old offices on the top floor. Figured we could eat on the roof. That sounds lovely. Neither of them had openly confronted the other about the development in their relationship, but they both wordlessly acknowledged the dynamic had changed. How exactly it had changed was still up in the air, but every time they were in the same room together, Valerie felt like she was in a kennel with a wild tiger. Well, if her aggression had woken up the carnivore inside of Naruto, she wasn't going to complain. The mere thought of him throwing her down in his bed and fucking the life out of her made her body throb with arousal. The real thing would be 100 times more enthralling. She just had to get there first. Rias was sitting at the kitchen table reviewing her latest history assignment when Ravel stomped in. Grumbling and growling under her breath, the blonde flounced over to the fridge. The air filled with the electric hum of the fridge's motor as Ravel practically tore the plastic door of its hinges, grabbing a box of orange juice before slamming it shut again with a bang. It was only once she gulped down a mouthful of citrus concentrate that the expression on Ravel's face shifted from threatening murder to threatening mutilation. "Hello to you too," Rias greeted dryly, looking back at the crisp printed lines for a minute before realizing she'd never be able to focus properly on her essay with the seething bishop lurking in the corner of the room. "Bad day?" Ravel sucked mutinously on her little red plastic straw until the loud slurping sounds of an empty juice box echoed through the kitchen. "Bad day?" She released the tube with a quiet pop. "Well, if by bad day you mean I had to stand around watching those two make googly eyes at each other, then yes, I had a bad day." If she followed a god, Rias would have prayed for the strength to deal with the headache she just knew was coming. "I see," she murmured, folding her hands on the table and studying the younger girl with a non-judgmental stare. "I mean, I'm not asking for much, right? We decided we'd mind our own business and that's fine, but I just know that blood-sucking whore is laughing at me." Ravel crushed a little cardboard box and carelessly threw it at the garbage bin. It missed, bouncing off to land on the floor, but she made no move to pick up her trash. "Oh, she thinks that she can get a fast one over on me, but I'm smarter than her. 10 times, no, 100 times smarter than her." Rias hummed. "Like, does she think she can hide it from me? I know she did something. All those smug little smirks and sneaky hugs are a piss-poor disguise." "I'm gonna find out, and when I do I'm gonna blow her out of the water. Anything she can do I can do better with both hands tied behind my back." If there was one thing Rias had learned over the years of having to act as impromptu therapist to the various members of her peerage, it was that it was always better to just let them get all the rage out. So instead of interrupting, she just sat quietly and listened to Ravel rant on and on, nodding or shaking her head at all the right times until the blonde wore herself out. Eventually Ravel petered down, working to get air back into her lungs once she finally ran out of things to say. There was a little flush crowning her cheekbones, which only intensified when she seemed to realize she'd gone and babbled about all her relationship problems to Naruto's aunt of all people. "Well, thanks for listening, I guess." Then she scurried out, not replying to Rias' half-hearted call that it hadn't been a problem. Rias stared at the empty doorway for a few more seconds before slowly exhaling and pressing the heel of her hand to her forehead. "Well, that happened, I guess," she groused, turning back down to pour back over her assignment. But no matter what she did, Rias couldn't quite get herself back in the groove. Her productive mood was totally lost. "Fine," Rias barked, slapping a hand on the tabletop and rocketing to her feet. "Just fine then, whatever. I guess this is happening. Rias is running around to clean up everyone's messes once again." Shaking her hair out of her face, the redhead tossed her half-finished homework in her school bag before stamping her way out of the room. She deliberately gave herself over to her discontent, determined to get all the negative energy out before she had to confront her complete and utter dunce of a nephew. "To think I lost the succession to a moron like that," Rias groaned, cracking her knuckles threateningly. Steel hinges creaked as Kaneko opened the door to one of the rooms coming up on the right-hand side of the hallway. The Nikomata took one glance at Rias' discontent face before practically jumping backward, shutting the door with a small bang. That more than anything broke through her stream of angry thoughts, sending a spike of vindictive amusement through Rias' gut that made her step back and see the dark humor in the entire situation. Putting the whip to Naruto and making him get in shape might irritate her, but it would horrify him. Having to have his aunt come and save him from his own romantic blunders was probably reminiscent of still needing his mother to hold his hand while he went to the toilet. Perhaps she'd even get a recurring joke out of the whole thing once it was all said and done. Blasting into Naruto's room like a hurricane, Rias smirked when he yelped and fell right off the bed, the wires of his headphones tangling around the knees. "What the hell, Rias?" She brushed off his indignant shout, snapping her fingers at him like she was beckoning a poorly behaved dog. "All right, up you get. We're going out for coffee and you're paying for it. That's the least you can do for me after I'm pulling your feet out of the fire once again." Rolling his eyes at her, Naruto climbed back to his feet before rooting around in the nightstand for his wallet. "What is it this time?" he grumbled, slipping a few bills in his pocket before plodding after the slightly shorter devil. "On the rag again? Having another quarter-life crisis? You'd have left the seat up and you fell in?" "To the first, if I was, I wouldn't tell you," Rias shot back, donning a long-sleeved green cotton blazer before they stepped out into the early September evening. "As for the second, you're hardly one to talk. And for the third, if such a thing happened I wouldn't be coming to complain to you about it. You can't even manage your own laundry. I could hardly expect you to manage my peerage." Fanning himself with a grin, Naruto reflexively scanned the street for onlookers as they strolled down to the cafe 3 blocks away. "You're pretty spicy today. I'm starting to think number 1 is definite, and number 2 is probable. Don't worry though, Auntie, I still love you." Literally neck yourself. Rias deadpanned, moving into the coffee shop and triggering a ring from the overhanging doorbell to announce their arrival. There is no hope left in this world for someone of your particular disabilities. Naruto snorted a laugh, shaking his head and stepping up to the counter to order for them while Rias was left to hunt for a table where they could see anyone entering and leaving the cafe. It only took a couple of minutes to get everything sorted before they found themselves each holding a steaming cup of coffee and sitting in the corner booth. A discreet spell muffled their conversation from any eavesdroppers, and the teasing humor slid off Naruto's face like melting ice cream. "What's going on?" he prodded, his gaze flickering between Rias and the nearly empty espresso bar and back again. "And please don't tell me that Gramps is after us again to go schmooze at a few fogey parties. I will cut my own nuts off if I have to deal with another one before the year is over." Rias glanced down skeptically, like she could see right through the table to settle a scornful glare on her target. "I didn't know you even had those to cut off at this point." Regardless, Rias cut over his protests, taking a small sip of dark, bitter coffee before continuing on. "I didn't call you out here to banter. I called you out here to tell you get your head on straight. I'm not going to beat around the bush. You have a harem, now manage it." An embarrassed blush flooded Naruto's face, and a mortified light briefly glinted in his eyes before he clenched his jaw in denial. "I don't see how it's any of your business what I get up to with Ravel or Valerie," he said slowly. "And I don't think you're one to talk, since you've got your own mess of a love life to worry about." "Excuse me?" Rias shot back, her tone rising with offended disbelief. "My romantic relationship is hardly a mess. Sasuke and I get along very well, thank you very much. And even we weren't, that doesn't make my criticisms of your issues any less valid." Giving a mean little laugh, Naruto shook his head and made an expression of sarcastic pity, his lips turning down into an exaggerated frown. "It's been years and I'm 90% sure you haven't even reached second base. A dead bedroom doesn't make for a healthy couple, you know. Not to mention I'm pretty sure you still haven't noticed that Kunou pants after both of you like a dog in heat. Talk about lack of self-awareness." Ria's first instinct was to deny Naruto's comment about her queen. Sure, Kunou loved to tease, but that wasn't the same thing as carrying a torch of unrequited love. If Kunou really wanted to be involved with either Rias or Sasuke, she wouldn't be playing matchmaker so hard on their behalf. But that rationale rang a little hollow, because Rias could see Kunou deciding to be self-sacrificing. Her best friend could be petty and selfish when dealing with outsiders, but Kunou could be absurdly generous with those she considered her family. It was something to ruminate over later, Rias decided. She came to solve Naruto's problems, not unearth her own. And besides, the ruined princess couldn't honestly claim to actually be disturbed at the thought of being a target for Kunou's romantic feelings. A little distressed at having missed something so supposedly obvious, but not disgusted. Rias shelved those thoughts, not bothering to follow them to whatever conclusion they'd lead her to. She had complications in the present to deal with. Regardless, Rias stressed, setting down her coffee so a reflexive, angry clench wouldn't crush the cup. "Whatever issues I might or might not have doesn't have a bearing on your issues, which is what we're talking about." Rolling his eyes, Naruto threw a handful of change on the table. "Well, it's not your business. I don't need you playing mother hen for me. So keep your meddling to your own peerage, thanks." Then he moved to stand. Rias couldn't help the anger that bubbled when he dismissed her, drawing into himself and brushing her off so curtly. "Stubborn fool." "Yes, it is," she shouted, making Naruto jerk back in surprise. "It became my business when you decided to ham-fist your harem. Did you forget that both your prospective wives are co-conspirators in a treasonous plot to overthrow the government? All it takes is one of them to decide that they want to get back at you and we're dead. Are you trying to get us all killed?" If not for the silencing spell surrounding their table, that outburst probably would have gotten them both kicked out of the cafe. Naruto's face worked like he couldn't quite decide how to feel, his eyebrows drawing tight as he grimaced. "I see. Well, that's the wrong-footed Gremory air sputtered, seemingly caught halfway between shock and rage. "Fuck." But then something strange happened. It was like a switch had been flipped inside Naruto, because all the contorted stress drained away from him in the space of 5 seconds. He inhaled, pulling his shoulders back as he sat back down, and then exhaled. The tense lines in Naruto's mien smoothed into approachable affability, and he actually gave Rias a small smile. The sudden transformation from angry young man to austere leader was so swift it was actually kind of creepy. "I'm not." Naruto responded to her last question in polite, measured tones. "I see your point, but I wasn't aware there was that much of an issue. Some jealousy, sure, but not anything on the level that it would explode in our faces like that." Still a bit wrong-footed by her nephew's shift in gears, Rias found herself moderating her own words to be quieter and less abrasive. It's not that they've been trying to kill each other in the living room quite yet, but the resentment is there and very real. If you don't try to mediate that tension, then something is going to explode fairly spectacularly at some point down the line. I see, was the only thing he said for a long while, staring through Rias with a distant glaze that made it pretty clear he was reliving a few moments he'd probably brushed off the first time around. She gave him the time to ruminate, afraid that pushing more would have Naruto climb back up. What do you think I should do then? Pierced by the sharp spike of intent in Naruto's gaze, Rias leaned back in her seat before biting her lip in thought. I think, she began, reflecting on the stream of half-formed solutions that floated in the back of her mind, that you should acknowledge each of them separately. Make sure they both know you accept all their feelings and return all their feelings, but that for political and cultural reasons you also have feelings for the other woman. After that, I suppose you should make some rough schedule in your mind. Thick incredulity marred Naruto's voice. A schedule? What am I, a gigolo? Rias offered her nephew a thin smirk. Maybe when you were growing up they told you that one day you'd have a harem, but when I grew up they told me one day I'd be in one. Trust me, having a day-to-day general rotation of sorts is not at all odd compared to how some men in Gehenna structure their time with their 24 concubines. Do I even want to know? No. I've upgraded it, so you should have less problems speaking Japanese to whoever you happen to run into. Throwing the worn little enchanted runestone to Asia, Rainier repressed the urge to roll her eyes at the girl's over-the-top gratitude. From the way Asia kept bowing and scraping, Rainier would almost assume she'd given the girl enormous tits after being consigned to a life of flat-chestedness or something, which wasn't beyond her abilities to do after preparation, admittedly. But if she ever entered the business of female enhancement, Rainier could pretty honestly say she was beyond all hope and should immediately commit suicide. Narrowing her electric violet stare at the blonde nun, Rainier very deliberately swallowed another hefty mouthful of fairy wine before waving the girl away. All right, party for one here tonight. You go out and have fun, or whatever it is kids do these days. She only barely held back from mockingly telling Asia not to get pregnant while she was out exploring the town. Not that it would have made a difference, since Argento seemed to think anything rude Rainier said was just her being dramatic and protecting herself from the love of mankind, or something equally as ridiculous. Once the door to the apartment clicked shut, Rainier collapsed back on the couch and eyed her dingy surroundings with pure disdain. To think that she'd been crafted out by a miracle of God himself centuries ago, and was now consigned to spending her days hiding within 4 water-stained walls in the slums of some has-been once industrial Japanese town. If she were maudlin enough about it, Rainier was sure she could produce some postmodern noir film about the pathetic banality of it all. But if she were that maudlin, Rainier supposed she'd be experiencing an existential crisis every other damn weekday. Taking another sip of the overly sweet purple wine she'd pilfered from Calawarner's stash 4 years ago, Rainier flipped open the now well-worn folder she'd gathered all of the collected data on Hyaду in. The ink was fading slightly after so much handling in so little time, but that didn't matter to Rainier. She was looked through the numbers rather than at them. It was harder than she thought to admit that the only reason she was breathing was because she was the recipient of misguided sadistic mercy. Rainier had gloated over surviving that one encounter with the wielder of true Longinus. But as time rolled on, she's slowly been forced to recognize that the only reason she wasn't dead was that she was allowed to walk away. Accepting her survival was little more than a win was hard enough, but as Rainier kept watching Hyaду, she slowly discovered the other watchers who had their eyes on the boy. It hadn't been the mercy of chance that led to Hyadu not being killed that night, but a carefully calculated response of an unknown party. That spearman had plans. Plans that needed Hyadu alive. Plans that required that Rainier be kept alive. She was trapped in the web of someone with a gulf of power over her, who expected her to dance on unseen strings and to act out some demented play for his benefit. Forcing down the constant paranoia long enough to call in a few favors and have Asia shipped into Ko was all she could force herself to do. Even then, sometimes Rainier wondered if that had been predicted and accounted for. It was maddening. Rainier freely admitted to anyone that asked that she was a coward. There was nothing wrong with cowardice, because it ensured survival and demanded cunning. A coward could go further than any noble paragon that was caged in by the expectations of morality and duty. All the greatest warriors had at some point been cowards that recognized when it was better to retreat and fight another day. So with the fear of oblivion burning on the back of her tongue, Rainier decided to break the rules and cobble together a road to life and victory out of the pieces of half a dozen barely formed plans. Once the solstice came, she could force through the ritual and take possession of Twilight Healing. It was technically against policy to kill humans to steal their sacred gears, but once she actually had the sacred gear in her possession, Rainier would have a leg up, both within the Grigori and against the bastard trying to play her. After that, All she had to do was rush Hayate. Her observations had shown that despite her attempt at getting rid of him, Hayate hadn't made any effort to actually train himself for combat. He'd barely even acknowledged that magic existed, much less become formidable in wielding it. The human that possessed the holy spear of the setting sun was Rainer's only real obstacle. As long as she moved quickly enough, she could get rid of Hayate before he interfered and retreat with both a victory and a sacred gear as proof of success for Azazel. Simple enough, if high risk in the end. And after living for centuries, Rainer was willing to take on that risk. If she didn't prove that she was more than the faceless masses, she wouldn't even garner Azazel's notice, much less be able to win a chance at his affection. Some things were worth more than mere existence. Smoke was thick in the air, heavy with the scent of vodka and tobacco, but Sasuke just shrugged it off and waved down another round of drinks from the bartender. To table 7. He ordered quietly, dropping a thick round of small bills on the counter and striding away without a backwards glance. Shoving through the crowd of drunk humans, Sasuke brushed off the reek of desperate lust that clouded the dance floor as he made his way to a tiny table in the back corner of the club. It was little more than 2 chairs parked on opposite sides of a square stool, but for them it was good enough. "I hope you're ready for the hangover in class tomorrow." The Uchiha snorted, throwing himself into the chair across from Naruto, wincing at the rusty creak it made once it had to bear his weight. "Because if you want to skip, I'm not providing your alibi,"